Do it.
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 23rd of May. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates.
We inherited a negotiation in which the principle of giving up UK sovereignty had already been conceded by the previous Tory government.
Chagos chaos. Yes, Sir Keir Starmer hands over the sovereignty of those British islands to Mauritius. But there's confusion over just how much this deal will cost us.
Yes, he says it's 100 million a year for 99 years, but he says that's a total of 3.4 billion. I'll be talking through how the maths adds up shortly. And could Trump save Britain's energy crisis? Well, the US president says Britain should incentivise drilling in the North Sea and stop with the costly and unsightly windmills. But Energy Minister says the government has other plans.
We're really clear that we have to continue the work of getting bills down for good. And the only way we're going to do that is to break our reliance on global fossil fuel markets we have no control over.
Elsewhere, small boat safety crisis. Yes, in a GB News exclusive, people smugglers are taking greater risks with the lives of migrants as they send them across the channel. Mark White is in Dover for us.
Well, as if to prove how reckless they are, the people smugglers have pushed a small boat out into the channel as a weather front moves into the area. The Coast Guard have put their spotter plane up over that small boat as heavy swells are being reported.
And it's been reported that Angela Rayner has encouraged Rachel Reeves to strip middle-class families of child benefits payments as the pair's alleged feud continues.
And are dogs replacing children? Well, new research shows that more couples are choosing to have a pet rather than their own children. Well, do you consider your fur baby? Yeah, apparently people are calling dogs fur babies now. Geez, a fur baby, is that part of your family? Oh, it's a busy show today.
It is.
It's actually. I was just thinking about this earlier. It's been a very busy week of news.
Absolutely.
We started off with an EU deal, if we can quite remember. It seems like it was weeks ago.
It does. Gosh, that was only Monday.
And then we had a government U-turn.
Yeah.
We've had the net migration figures out. We've had the Chagos Islands deal moved on. I mean, is there anything that hasn't happened this week?
True. And these are all big Big news, big things. I mean, the Chagos deal, it seems quite obscure in some ways. It's a part of the world that probably nobody ever heard of until it came in the news last year. But so significant, this idea of giving away our sovereignty. And as Grant Shapps, the former Defence Secretary, who's going to be on the programme later, has said, this even calls into question the safety of our bases on, for example, Cyprus, because Cyprus... We don't own the land. What if Cyprus decide that they want a deal from us now to pay them to have our base on the land? Who knows?
It's huge questions and a lot that actually remains unanswered, despite the text of this treaty being now public. Well, we'll get to all the juicy details and try and work out, as Catherine Forster was saying, how do the sums all add up? Well, do get involved. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in that comment section down below. But let's get, in the meantime, your latest news headlines.
Tom, thank you. The top stories. US President Donald Trump is calling for the UK to increase and incentivise North Sea oil drilling. Writing on Truth Social today, he says our negotiated deal with the United Kingdom is working out well for all. I strongly recommend to them, however, that in order to get their energy costs down, they stop with the costly and unsightly windmills and incentivise modernised drilling in the North Sea, where large amounts of oil lay waiting to be taken. Well, that's as energy bills in the UK will fall by 7% in July, the first drop for a year, energy regulator Ofgem has announced. It means a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will see their annual bill fall by £129. The regulator's price cap, which is set to every 3 months, sets the maximum that suppliers can charge for each unit of energy, affecting 21 million households in England, Scotland and Wales. Charities say cheaper bills are welcome, but many people still struggle to pay, with millions of customers collectively owing about £4 billion to suppliers. Ofgem makes the announcement following a price drop in gas and oil triggered by Donald Trump's tariffs. Elsewhere, 9 people suspected of working illegally in the UK have been arrested after Home Office immigration enforcement officers descended on a Surrey caravan park on Tuesday morning. The individuals, 5 Brazilian men, 1 Brazilian woman, 2 Indian men and an Indian woman, were arrested at the site in Green Lane following intelligence they were working illegally as delivery drivers in the gig economy. Currently, companies hiring gig economy and zero-hours workers are not legally required to check the status of these workers, but the government is changing the law so illegal working checks are expanded to bring them in line with other employers. The Telegraph is set to be sold to a transatlantic group led by Redbird Capital, ending 2 years of uncertainty over its future. The founder of the US private equity firm has signed a preliminary £500 million deal to take control of the historic publisher, with an additional agreement to deliver a, quote, significant investment in journalism. The deal comes after the government blocked a previous takeover attempt by Redbird last year, amid fierce political backlash over press freedom concerns. And Manchester United have begun the process of telling staff they've lost their jobs just hours after the team's defeat in the Europa League final. Mail Sport understands that some of the 200 employees at risk of redundancy are being informed of their fate this week. Following the 1-0 loss to Tottenham, Old Trafford executives are cracking on with the club's cuts. Chief Executive Omar Barada told staff in February that more redundancies were on their way as part of a transformation plan aimed at returning the club to profitability. This followed 250 job losses last year. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more from me at 12:30.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 6 minutes past midday and fury continues after the Prime Minister signed a so-called £30 billion surrender deal, handing over sovereignty of the British Chagos Islands to Mauritius.
Well, the government argues it secures our national security, and without this deal, control of the army base could be lost via international courts. Well, joining us now in the studio to discuss the details, we've got political correspondent Catherine Forster. Now, Catherine, of course, the negotiations for this deal started under the Conservative government, but the Conservatives are saying that they absolutely would not have signed up to this, that this is a big mistake. Not only is it costly, but it threatens our national security. So Has the government got a leg to stand on this deal?
Well, yes, the Conservatives were negotiating for years, and it all stems, of course, from the fact that Mauritius have been after getting sovereignty of the Chagos Islands for decades, and there was an International Court of Justice ruling a few years ago that said that it should be given over to them. That was only advisory, and so the Conservatives were able to keep negotiating but sort of drag their heels. The government, I was at the press conference yesterday, the Prime Minister is absolutely insistent that they had no choice but to sign this deal and sign it now, because what they're saying is that within months there would be other legally binding rulings. At that point, they'd be in breach of international law, and that would then happen was systems and things on which they depend, such as satellite systems and so on and so forth, would start to be withdrawn, and that would be a huge threat to our security. So their argument is they have no choice at all. Of course, the Conservatives taking a very, very different line, and I think it is very contentious given the money that's being spent and given how, straitened the circumstances are that we find ourselves in at the moment.
Now, Catherine, there's a lot of funny maths involved in this deal because the government says this is £100 million a year for 99 years with the option of renewing for another 40. Now, I'm not the best at mental arithmetic in the world. I'm not a sort of Stephen Hawking, but I can add up. I can add up 100 million times 10. And then I can do that 3 times, and that only gets to 30 years. And that's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is, how possibly can this deal be £3 billion if it's £100 million each year? Surely that £3 billion would only last 30 years of this deal before you account for inflation.
Exactly. So 100 million a year times 100 years, OK, 99, is 10 billion. And the Prime Minister yesterday said 100 million a year average, total of 3.4 billion. Now, me and other political journalists were talking to the Number 10 team for a long time after the press conference, trying to understand. But the fact of the matter is that these are both correct. But it is all about, in terms of the 3.4 billion, the way that it is calculated, it's calculated using something called net present values. I'm not going to go into it because it sort of blows your mind, but they've chosen a way of calculating it, and that is correct. But it is also correct to say that if you calculate it a different way, you get an entirely different number.
Because this is as if the government is putting a sort of deflationary effect on the spending, that it decreases year on year on year on year. Whereas you could calculate it with an inflationary effect. Adjust for inflation, you get closer to 30 billion being
Well, I think Starmer was quoted in the Telegraph as saying that this is cheaper than the cost of an aircraft carrier without the aircraft.
He said that.
So obviously, that's part of the working out as well.
He said that to me when I was saying, how can you justify this when you're making cuts to disability benefits? It's only the cost of an aircraft carrier per year, 0.2% of the defence budget, but a difficult sell, I think.
And on the legal implications, clearly the government believes that, had they not signed up to this deal, there would be these international law charges. But, of course, others would argue that these opinions, these cases are legally non-binding. Parliament is sovereign. We have all sorts of other overseas territories, the Falklands, Chagos, not Chagos, we're talking about Chagos, Falklands, Gibraltar, even our bases on Cyprus. What's the implications now for those places if we just roll over to an opinion from the ICJ?
Well, I think this is distinct in that, the Chagos Islands are not far from Mauritius, and Mauritius was originally in the same sort of administrative area when it was a colony, and so that's why they can lay this claim. But the Conservatives are saying, look, it was only advisory, we would not have done this, but the government are saying this within months would have become impossible.
OK, well, let's further this conversation on, thanks very much, Catherine, with the Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat. Because, Tom, the Conservatives are being very, very damning of the government at the moment, but it is completely true to say that these negotiations were initially kicked off under the Conservative government.
Sadly, Tom, you're completely right. But the reality is we also had a very good Foreign Secretary who stopped it in David Cameron, demonstrating that you don't actually have to follow through with this. So I'm afraid you're right. The bureaucratic state, the institution, as it were, pushed these negotiations and continued pushing them. And sadly, we didn't stop them when we should have done. That's all true. but we did stop it in time. Now, what Labour have done, I'm afraid, is they've accepted that a change of a bureaucrat's pen in 1905, 6, something like that, which put the Chagos Islands under Mauritius rather than where they'd previously been under the Seychelles, is somehow some sort of claim. And the idea that they're nearby, I'm afraid, is complete rubbish unless you think that Athens is part of Greater London or Tunis is part of South Kent. They're 1,300 miles away. This is a vast distance. They're much closer to the Seychelles by 300 miles. So they're still 1,000 miles away from that. You know, these are very, very isolated islands. They have no connection other than a bureaucratic connection under the Colonial Office, which was set up by us in the 1900s. It's a completely spurious claim.
Now, Tom, there are enormous concerns about the costs of this deal, but also the national security implications. Can you outline what the potential problems might be in the near future, in the far future, having this airbase potentially under the control of a country that may be allied with China?
Well, look, I mean, the reality is I think the US are going to maintain the ownership. So I'm not sure that's the thing that we need to be concerned about. But the immediate thing that we need to be concerned about is the fact that this is £100 million that is going to come off the defence budget every year, which means that whatever you think was announced about a defence increase a few months ago by Starmer, it's not a defence increase at all. It's a defence cut. He's just announced that he's made a defence cut. He's included the intelligence account into the defence budget, and he's included the Chagos deal into the defence budget. Well, in that case, what's he going to cut? Because he can't pay for the carriers, he can't pay for the planes, he can't pay for the ships on the same budget that he had announced before, because he's just announced.
But Tom Tugendhat, John Healey, the Defence Secretary, says it's 0.2% of the defence budget. Given that sort of context, I suppose the government argues that it's not a particularly high proportion of the overall spend.
Yeah, but the only increase in the defence budget was 0.4%, so it's half of that, right? And given that defence inflation runs at about 7%, this is actually in real terms a defence cut. And that's only this year. That's not even including the inflation that will kick in the years to come. So this is a really, really bad deal. Look, and even if you just want to look at the raw figures, right? £100 million, what's that? 350,000 pensioners' winter fuel allowance? 18,000 prison places. I mean, you know, take your pick how you want to look at the metric, right? But this is money that we weren't paying out last year and we will have to pay out next year. That's a cost. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. That is a cost. And that means a cut in other things, or it means a tax rise. Take your pick.
OK, well, Tom Tugendhat, Conservative MP, thanks indeed for joining us. In fact, we'll put some of those points now to the Labour Member of Parliament for Dover and Deal, Mike Tapp. Mike, this is a cost that we are now paying to have a base that we, until yesterday, had for free.
Well, look, the Conservatives, and Tom knows full well that there were big questions over us securing this base long term, and there's a risk assessment being carried out here in the interests of national security, and this base is like an unsinkable warship in the Indian Ocean, and that's what we've got to consider here. We've launched missions going into the Middle East, into North Africa, and it's vital for future security, particularly with the threats that are growing globally. And that's why we've done this. We're putting national security first. The Conservatives know that. They started these negotiations, and to be quite frank, I'm disappointed that they're playing these political games.
But Mike, a lot of our viewers will wonder why the government, the British government, is putting international law. Some of these judgments are not binding, they're advisory. I mean, the US isn't even signed up to the ICJ. We're partners with them in the base at Diego Garcia. They will ask, why is a British government putting international legal advice above British national security?
Well, actually, it's quite the opposite. We're putting British national security first here. There were advisory rulings, you're right, in 2019 and 2021, and the risk assessment that's being carried out here is that if this continues and this were to go to court, which was highly likely, then we may lose that sovereignty. At the same time, while that's happening,
but we're only losing sovereignty on paper, in the opinion of international judges. Are you expecting it's going to be invaded by another country?
No. While that's happening, an order would go down, which means we wouldn't be able to operate from that base. We would lose vital national security infrastructure because of that.
Who would physically stop us from operating from that base?
Well, look, the moment these orders go down, if we ignore them, then a lot of the assets that we use within the base, involving Five Eyes and other nations, would fall down because they would also follow those advisories. So things like that satellite coverage, launching RAF missions and military missions from there wouldn't happen.
Do you think the French or the Americans, who aren't signed up to the ICJ, would actually cut that on the basis of some international legal opinion?
This is about national security and certainty of the future of that. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but what we can say is that an educated legal risk assessment has been conducted here, and what's best for our national security is to ensure we've got over a century of using that base for our operations. And with the threat from China, for example, holding that base is vital. It's an unsinkable warship which we have to maintain and continue operating from.
And yet we haven't got the same sort of access to this base that we previously did. I mean, if we look to Annex 1B1 of the agreement, we'll see that any armed attack that takes place from Diego Garcia now, we must inform Mauritius of any armed attack on a third state. I mean, that sounds like we've lost a lot of
I like you because you always do your research. But look, what it doesn't say there is before that is launched. And look, once we've got jets up in the sky, it's pretty obvious what's happening, isn't it? So, look, for me, that's not in any way a threat. I'm sure our top spies will have been involved in this assessment to ensure that it's secure going forward.
What recourse do we have if Mauritius was to renege on the deal in some way?
Well, this is a solid deal, and this has got the support
right now, but who knows which government will be in power in Mauritius in 10 years, how close they'll be to China in 20 years, we don't know.
This is a solid deal that we've signed. It's got the support of the Americans, Five Eyes, NATO. The people who are against it are Russia, China, Iran, the Conservatives and Reform.
Is there any evidence that China is against it?
I can assure you, they do not want an unsinkable warship operating in that area.
This is
they pose a threat.
This is the implication of the Prime Minister. I find this argument a very strange one.
The Chinese...
Because there's the assertion of the Prime Minister that the Russians and the Chinese are against it, but I haven't seen a single word, a single press release, a single argument from these countries that they're against.
The Chinese, as we know, pose a threat to Taiwan. Us holding this unsinkable warship, as I've said, in this strategic position could be vital in the future, which is why the Americans support it.
It just
why
seems
NATO
very,
support
very
it,
strange that the argument seems to rest upon the idea that someone would attack or somehow undermine the operational independence of a NATO base with the most well-equipped armies of the world on it. I just find it very, very strange and legalistic.
This is about...
That you think that Donald Trump's America would pay heed to some advisory ruling in the UN over and above the operation of one of our joint bases.
This is about keeping the base running. And as you know, you've done your homework within the deal. Our foreign adversaries can't use the islands surrounding it for their own bases. The moment an order goes down, they'd be able to do that.
Now, we must get to one other issue, Miriam.
Yes, so migration figures yesterday, quite a significant fall in net migration, 50% down on the year before. Now, of course, the reason for this is that the Conservatives made some reforms at the very end of the last Parliament, reducing student visas, increasing their salary cap. Now, of course, Conservatives are responsible for such high levels of immigration in the first place. But you put out an interesting tweet yesterday that seemed to claim credit for the Labour Party for that fall in migration. It's not quite correct, is it?
Well, look, what I haven't done there is said anything about the Conservative Party. I'm talking about reform, spinning this, and what they're doing is they're saying to us, oh, well, it's not enough. Look, we've only had under a year, and of course we're building on that. Look, if there's...
that's a fair point, but the tweet says this Labour government halving net migration.
Well, Yvette Cooper is running the Home Office. It's Yvette Cooper who's kept any measures in place that might have been there.
And if you look at the white paper, which is the report of last year's figures, is a result of those Conservative reforms.
It's not just last year's figures. Well, sorry. My apologies.
This year's figures.
24.
Labour have been in government for a large part of that. We've kept in place any measures that we thought would work, and we're moving forward with harder measures.
Did row back on the increase to spousal visas. So actually, it would have been even lower had you kept all of the Conservative
If you look at the white paper measures that we're going to be implementing, that's going to bring this down even further, creating jobs for British workers and putting them first so we're not relying on outside workforces. This is something we take very seriously. We're going to bring down net migration. We're bringing in counter-terror powers to tackle illegal migration too.
Now, experts say it might be brought down by about 50 to 100,000. Would you be comfortable with a 300,000 level of net migration?
Look, we haven't put a figure on this. I want to see it go as low as possible. And what I mean by possible is it needs to be linked with skills training, education and the jobs market, so we're putting British workers first, essentially.
OK, Mike Tapp, thanks very much indeed for joining us live in the studio. Now, Donald Trump thinks he has a solution to bringing down your energy bill, and that's drilling more North Sea oil.
Yes, posting on his Truth social media page, the US president also urged us to stop using wind turbines, calling them costly and unsightly.
Well, let's get the analysis now of nuclear policy and power market policy analyst. What a title. Malcolm Grimston. Malcolm, thanks for being with us. Is Donald Trump essentially right that more incentivisation needs to happen in the North Sea here in the United Kingdom?
Well, I think there's two angles to this. I mean, firstly, actually, the market is already doing this with offshore wind. Because offshore wind is so expensive and the subsidies are reducing somewhat, we've seen offshore wind cancelled in Australia, in the States, in Canada, in Denmark, in Sweden, and indeed in the UK recently. It does seem very odd that we're importing considerable amounts of gas from Norway that gets it from under the North Sea, instead of pumping it out ourselves from under the North Sea and getting the balance of payments benefits and the security benefits that are associated with that. So in the context that we certainly need to reduce carbon emissions, I think climate change is a real thing. But doing it in such a way that we just cut our throats and export the emissions to other countries who then emit carbon on our behalf doesn't seem to me to be a particularly sensible energy policy.
Do you think Donald Trump understands about the specific details of the UK energy market? Obviously, it's very different in the US. Fracking's been hugely successful. It's brought down energy prices. But, of course, there's vast swathes of the US that are not populated. Do you think he really understands the details of how complicated our energy sector is?
I think it unlikely, based on his pronouncements in many fields, that he has a real grip of that. And certainly the UK is very different. Fracking may be a contribution here, but as you say, there are vast swathes of the US where nobody lives, where you can frack to your heart's content and not really do much damage to local communities. That's not the case here. We're much more densely populated. And our North Sea reserves are beginning to run short. We had a golden decade from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s when we were a net gas exporter. Since then, our reserves have begun to decline. There's doubtless more there to be found, but we are needing to think, as I think we have been for a while, of what post-North Sea oil and gas that the UK will look like, and starting to make those investments now.
No, big decisions there for the government. Malcolm Grimston, policy analyst, thanks indeed for joining us.
Well, you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show.
Yes, it's been reported that Angela Rayner has encouraged Rachel Reeves to strip middle-class families of child benefit payments as the pair's alleged feud continues.
But after the break, in a GB News exclusive, people smugglers are taking greater risks than ever with the lives of migrants as they send them across the channel. Stay tuned.
Westminster, the ultimate clique. And you're fighting like rats in a sack. But here on the Camilla Tominey Show, we ask the questions the establishment media is too scared to ask. OK, let me ask you a straight question, because I know you're a straight-talking politician. Whether it's net zero, illegal immigration or law and order, nothing is off-limits. You had the power then.
Yeah, as I
and
say,
now you've lost it. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show that's fearless. But no, let me finish my question if you don't mind, because it is my show. Sundays at 9:30, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
My mum booted me out. She kicked me out. I was 15 going on 16. Yeah. And she'd had enough. And, you know, I think she, like lots of parents, have their own issues as well. And I slept on the streets of Manchester for 12 months, which is, you know, was sort of an experience in itself. Regular occurrence, being beaten up, being urinated on, getting ill, feeling horrible. And someone took me in at first, and so I was essentially groomed into a gang that you know, were involved in nefarious means. And it was similar. It wasn't drugs, but it was similar to sort of the stuff you hear about county lines, where I was essentially a bit of a stooge, bit of a runner. Here, go and do us a favour, and we'll put a roof over your head. That then came. I fled that eventually after I think close to a year. And it all come crumbling down. A few months later, there was phone calls from the police. You need to come in, otherwise we're going to arrest you.
When did you change?
I thought, I'm trying to find a bit of part-time work to get by around college. And they said, well, the thing is, it's the law. We've got to be careful about data protection. And in my sort of naive mind at the time, I thought, right, I'm going to write to my MP. They can change the law. They're going to do it. We're going to, you know,
Good luck with that.
This. Yeah, quite. I know now the difference. So in the end, I always been a bit creative and a bit of a talker, as you'll know.
Yeah.
I thought, no, I'm going to interview my MP. I thought, no, actually, I'm going to interview MPs, plural. So I went round the country, essentially knocking on doors with a letter, explaining my situation, going, this isn't right. So I interviewed Jonathan Aitken, former Tory Cabinet Minister. Andy Burnham took me under his wing because I had a bit of a go at him and said, you've agreed with me for the last 45 minutes of this interview. What have you done about it?
Yeah.
And he said, I like your attitude. Why don't you come and shadow me in Westminster?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Nigel is back.
Good evening.
Unfiltered.
Are these proposals bold enough?
Uncompromising.
Will it bring growth?
Unmissable.
We as a country are brilliant.
Nigel Farage returns. Coming soon. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 28 minutes past 12, and senior maritime sources are exclusively telling GB News that people smuggling gangs are taking increasing risks with migrant lives.
Well, now border officials warn that they're preparing to respond to an influx of channel crossings today. And our man on the scene is, of course, our Home and Security editor, Mark White, down in Dover for us. Mark, what's the scene today?
Well, we have a very graphic illustration of what these senior maritime security sources have been telling us about the increasingly reckless behaviour of the people smugglers. It's not ideal conditions in the channel at all today. Although it looks pretty flat and calm out there, it's not. There's a weather front moving in, and already we've got 1 metre swells out there in the middle of the channel. Well, the people smugglers, about an hour and a half ago, pushed a small boat out from a beach south of Boulogne, so pretty far down the French coast. That's now making its way across in heavy swells. As we speak, the Coast Guard have put their spotter plane up over the area, and it's actually circling round. I think you can see images of the trail of that Coast Guard plane circling round that scene, monitoring that small boat that we're told has about 40 people on board. And already, according to our sources, because of the swells, the migrants have been seen sort of bailing out water from the front of that vessel. So some real concern around that. It's being shadowed, as they always are, by a French escort warship, and the Border Force vessel Ranger is also heading to that area as well. But it's probably 50-50 as to whether it actually makes it to UK waters, given how conditions are deteriorating out there.
Now, Mark, we've seen the numbers of migrants crossing on small boats go up and up this year. Indeed, they've been going up really since 2018, apart from brief falls a couple of years ago. Why do we keep getting an increase in the pull factors? Is it just that it becomes more known about that Britain's offering hotel accommodation, or that it's very difficult to get deported from Britain? What are the pull factors that's causing this problem to get worse and worse and worse?
Well, in terms of coming across the channel by a small boat or in the back of a lorry, the biggest pull factor of all is the fact that once you get to the UK, you're pretty unlikely to be removed, because if you come from multiple countries, it's deemed too unsafe to return you to those countries. And of course, the people smugglers tell those migrants to throw away their identifying documents as well, it makes it all the more difficult to remove people. So the vast majority of people coming over either get granted asylum or they get eventually leave to remain here. And as part of the efforts to try to clamp down on the illegal immigration of individuals into this country, we've seen a sort of stepping up of the efforts by immigration enforcement to carry out raids. We can report on another series of raids, this time targeting a caravan park in Surrey. Border Force, immigration enforcement, I should say, raided that park with static caravans and arrested 9 people, all suspected of illegal immigration offences. They were 6 Brazilians and 3 Indian nationals, all suspected of working in the gig economy, working for delivery companies, going along and effectively filling in for people that have that sort of delivery contract and doing that work without permission, of course, to be able to do that. So those 9 individuals are now in detention, being questioned by immigration enforcement, and they are just the tip of the iceberg. It's estimated there's anything up to 1.5 million people working in the illegal economy in this country, and you know, the efforts by immigration enforcement may have been stepped up, but it's only ever going to be a drop in the ocean compared to the issues around illegal working.
Really, really fascinating to see those pictures, Mark White. Thanks indeed for bringing them to us. And, of course, we'll be catching up with you throughout the programme there down in Dover. It's interesting, actually, how we're getting all of these videos from the government, just from a political point of view, because these sorts of raids, of course, have always happened under every government of every colour and every stripe. And yet this government seems very, very keen to record when they happen, to publish those information, frankly, to give that video to Mark White.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting they're trying to get people to understand what they're doing in this field.
What they're up against, how difficult it is, the figures involved, and they probably learned from the failures of the last government, who were continually told, you're not doing enough, you're not doing enough. At least they're providing evidence of what is being done.
But also strange, because the last government was thinking itself about publishing, and they were umming and ahhing about the human rights of people in the videos, and should we publish the videos, should we not? And they never did.
No. Well, I suppose it's progress of a sort, Tom. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show.
Yes, not a single extra fish will be taken from UK fishing waters as a result of the Labour government's Brexit reset deal. Well, that's what the minister behind Starmer's negotiations has told GB News. But how on earth could that even work?
And after the break, it's been reported that Angela Rayner has encouraged Rachel Reeves to strip middle-class families of child benefit payments as the pair's alleged feud continues. Well, we'll have all of that after your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. The top stories is our US President Donald Trump is calling for the UK to increase and incentivise North Sea oil drilling. Writing on Truth Social, he says our negotiated deal with the United Kingdom is working out well for all. I strongly recommend to them, however, that in order to get their energy costs down, they stop with the costly and unsightly windmills and incentivise modernised drilling in the North Sea, where large amounts of oil lay waiting to be taken. That says energy bills will fall by 7% in July, the first drop for a year. Energy regulator Ofgem has announced. It means a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will see their annual bill fall by £129. The regulator's price cap, which is set every 3 months, sets the maximum that suppliers can charge for each unit of energy, affecting 21 million households in England, Scotland and Wales. Charities say cheaper bills are welcome, but many people still struggle to pay, with millions of customers collectively owing about £4 billion to suppliers. Ofgem makes the announcement following a price drop in gas and oil triggered by Donald Trump's tariffs. And the Telegraph is set to be sold to a transatlantic group led by Redbird Capital, ending 2 years of uncertainty over its future. The founder of the US private equity firm has signed a preliminary £500 million deal to take control of the historic publisher, with an additional agreement to deliver a, quote, significant investment in journalism. The deal comes after the government blocked a previous takeover attempt by Redbird last year amid fears political backlash over press freedom concerns. Those are the latest headlines for now. More at 1 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Done. My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of the markets today. The pound buying you $1.3500 and 1.1895 euros. The price of gold, £2,467 and 11 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 8,745 points.
Done. My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. One more fine day before the weather changes quite a bit for the weekend. The wet weather, in fact, already moving in later today across parts of Northern Ireland, courtesy of these weather fronts finally pushing away the high pressure that's brought many of us a fine spell through this week. And it's still pretty good out there today. Some thickening cloud across southern counties may produce 1 or 2 showers, but generally dry and bright, some good spells of sunshine. But it is clouding over across western Scotland, and there's those weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland, slowly trickling in, getting towards Belfast by the middle of the afternoon. Temperature-wise, well, in the sunny spells, we could still get to 22, maybe 23 Celsius. Cooler around some coasts and where it is predominantly cloudy, and certainly feeling cooler as the rain seeps its way into Northern Ireland and trickles into western Scotland during this evening. Much of Scotland will stay fine through the evening rush hour, but that rain will be pushing on to the west coast. It's going to be a damp end to the day across Northern Ireland, and that rain spreading into parts of north and west Wales too. Further south and east staying dry and fine, but even here it is going to cloud over, and that rain will be working into pretty much all areas as we go through the night. So if you're heading out this evening, just be prepared for that rain to be creeping its way across many western areas, getting to eastern England, eastern Scotland through the early hours, maybe even the odd heavier burst here and there. So a very different night, a very damp night and a very mild night. Last night we got down to -5 in Scotland. Tonight, most of us staying in double figures. So it will be a cold start to the weekend, but it will be a dull and a damp start. Now, this main area of rain is going to shimmy away pretty smartly. So for most places, tomorrow's a brightening up kind of day. There'll be some lifting of the cloud, maybe even a few sunny spells, but that could spark some heavy showers, perhaps over eastern England, northeast Scotland, 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland. So yes, there'll be some showers, but it should brighten up as we go through Saturday.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from gbnews.com. Drivers should note roadworks on the A725 southbound in Blantyre, with closures at the B70012 Main Street off-slip and the A724 Glasgow Road on-slip. Follow diversions to avoid delays. The M4 eastbound experienced an accident between junction 40 Tieback and junction 39 Grows. In Kent, a collision on the A249 northbound causes 10-minute delays between the M2 and A2500. Congestion on the A303 westbound in Wiltshire adds a 15-minute delay between the A345 and A360. And on the trains, no service runs between Hereford and Craven Arms, and the Gatwick Express has no service. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Welcome back. It's 20 to 1, and in what could be a signal of a major division between the members of the cabinet is forming between Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves.
Yes, they've reportedly clashed over the issue of child benefits, with the Deputy Prime Minister apparently urging the Chancellor to strip middle-class families of that payment.
Well, the story comes from the same leaked memo in which Ms Rayner reportedly suggested the introduction of 8 new tax rises and has further stoked rumours that she is herself positioning to replace Sir Keir Starmer as Prime Minister.
Well, to discuss this further, we're joined with the chief political commentator at The Independent, John Rentoul. John, first of all, before we get into the detail of the policy, who do you think is leaking this stuff? Is this Angela Rayner?
Imagine who
is this Angela Rayner?
Who would have drafted a letter in March before the spring statement to Rachel Reeves, knowing perfectly well that Rachel Reeves wasn't going to adopt any of the suggestions, in order to make use of it later? I've got no idea.
So are you suggesting that Angela Rayner wrote these things because she thought that the Labour selectorate would like it? She's now leaking it because the Prime Minister looks weakened after the local election results and perhaps is preparing what could rhyme with the words headership lid.
Quick thinking, Tom.
I think what you mean, Tom, is that she's making helpful suggestions, suggestions in a collegiate way, in a discussion with colleagues about the options for the autumn budget. And she recognises that if she wants more money for her 1.5 million house building target, I mean, I'm not sure how well that's going. I mean, they're nearly a year in, and I don't know how much progress they've made towards that. But anyway, Angela Rayner wants more money for house building, and so it's incumbent on her, I think, as a responsible politician, to come up with some suggestions to how it might be paid for. A lot of the suggestions are tough or difficult or problematic, but at least she's making realistic suggestions about how the government might raise additional revenue or make savings.
I do think that's a very fair point, John, and of course all cabinet ministers are welcome to make suggestions and have input.
Well, they're not actually. They're not actually, unless they're invited to do so.
They have a duty. They have a duty to make sensible suggestions that they think are in the national interest, whether or not people.
It's always in someone else's department, though, isn't it?
Well, yes, except that Treasury is the #1 department, and Treasury is the #1 blocker for everybody's departmental spend. But let's look at some of her proposals in detail, and of course, remembering that the government has promised not to raise income tax or workers' national insurance, which means they're in a bit of a bind and need to look for other ways of raising tax if they decide to do that.
Which is why it's interesting, yeah.
Which is why she's had to be a bit creative. Now, some of these are about removing inheritance tax relief, pensions, lifetime allowance, banking surcharge, and cutting child benefit for middle-class families. And it's been called an attack on the middle class, but of course it has to be if you want to find some sort of taxation that isn't income tax.
Exactly, and as Tom suggested, I mean, this is mostly about soaking the rich, although a very gentle soak, actually. I mean, most of these raise fairly small amounts of money, but if you are trying to raise money or make savings, then you should obviously be aiming at the upper end of the income scale.
Is that right, though, John? Because actually, under the Conservatives, of course, the Conservative government did many things wrong, but actually, under the Conservatives, the bulk of the tax burden moved further and further up the income spectrum. And in fact, people on middle and low incomes are paying less tax than they have historically, but people on higher incomes are paying much, much higher tax. And there comes a point where you just can't squeeze people any further, where the marginal tax rates become so high that it's not worth people taking a promotion, it's not worth paying any more money. So do you think the government really understands just how socialist our tax system is already?
I think we are a very long way from that crunch point. I mean, people make the mistake of comparing our tax system with America. If you compare our tax system with Northern Europe, we are undertaxed, and we expect Northern European quality of public services. So it's perfectly acceptable, I think, to ask the better off to pay a bit more in tax, and that's what Angela Rayner's doing.
Arguably,
take some of the benefits away from so-called middle class families.
Now, of course, it's very hard for any politician to do this, and I wouldn't recommend them doing it at all. But I have seen economists say that the problem is that our taxes aren't broad-based enough. The problem, and this is why the Chancellor chose to raise national insurance, because it has a lot of people who pay it, rather than the people in the sort of top 1% of incomes. There just aren't that many of them. And if you want to raise a serious amount of money, putting a penny on income tax on the lowest band would raise far more money.
Yes, but that wouldn't be fair. I mean, why not tilt it towards the better off? I think that's absolutely right. But of course, there's a limit to what you can do with that, because the very richest, of course, are internationally mobile and are leaving the country, and the non-dom tax hike isn't going to raise any money as a result.
I've got a solution that no one has raised yet, and that's to just apply VAT to everything. Get rid of all the exemptions, maybe have a lower rate of VAT. You'd probably raise quite a bit of money despite having a lower rate of VAT, and stop all of the weird market distortions that take place because of all the weird exceptions.
That would fall on the less well off, because that would apply to food and children's clothes and so on, things which feature more in the budgets of people on lower incomes.
Well, with all of the extra revenue, you could offset those problems.
Yeah, well, that's what Angela Rayner is suggesting. Some offsetting measures for you. There you go. You agree with her.
Well, John Mantle, we're going to have to leave it there. But some helpful suggestions. Maybe you should leak them to the Telegraph, and they'll make it into Rachel Reeves's red box. That would be very interesting. I've got to say, I agree with you. I think get rid of all these kind of detailed taxes on the side, unique taxes, niche taxes that are very easy to get out of if you've got a good accountant, and have a flat rate of tax that everybody pays. Of course, lower for the lower earners, but
that's why we have some redistribution, so that I don't want any more Jaffa cake trials. So you have to determine whether it's a biscuit or a cake, and it gets a different level of tax if it is or not. It's all ridiculous. Simplify it. Well, a Labour government spokesman has said that those reports of a feud between Angela Rayner and Rachel Reeves, they've responded by saying they won't respond. They've said they don't comment on leaks. But let's get away from all of that and have a look at the travel weather.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
There's the chance of a little bit of light rain in Sicily over the course of the weekend. Small chance of some showers in Mallorca as well. Plenty of sunshine for Greece. That should continue for the next few days. We've seen some wet weather across Croatia recently, but the showers here are also clearing. There's that thicker cloud and patchy rain that may affect Sicily. 1 or 2 showers for Mallorca and Menorca. Small chance of a shower or 2 in southern Spain as well. But generally, Spain and Portugal and the Canaries set fair with plenty of sunshine for the next few days.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world. Am I allowed to talk then? No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m. only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What is the state of our economy? What is the state of our National Health Service? What is the state of our schools?
What on earth is going on?
Understanding Britain means understanding the state we are in. This is State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin, Wednesdays, Thursdays and Fridays from 8 p.m. on GB News.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m. weekdays here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's now 8 minutes to 1, and I can't believe that I'm saying this next sentence out loud. Dogs are replacing children.
Well, scientists say that the love of dogs is contributing to falling birth rates as couples pick a family of dogs over babies.
That sounds utterly extraordinary, but I do have a theory here.
Come on.
I think this is all to do with the housing crisis. You have space for either a dog or a baby. And in time gone by, it would be lovely to have a dog and a baby. But people don't have any room. We've got the smallest houses in the Western world.
That is a very good theory, although a lot of people think that their house is too small to have a dog. So whether that applies... I've got another theory.
Yeah.
People have got an instinct to want to nurture, you know, obviously because that comes from our desire to reproduce, which is very important biologically.
Yeah.
But it's become very risky having children, financially, definitely, but also because as kind of society disintegrates, people become more individualistic. There isn't this corporate effort to raising children. And in the past, when you had children, you'd know that your family, your neighbours, your village, your community would help raise those children. They wouldn't be solely your responsibility. You would have help. And now I don't think you get that help. You feel that it's all on you, and therefore a dog's just less risky.
I think a huge amount of that is also down to housing, because
I'm sure you're right.
If you live in a big city, the likelihood that you know your neighbours is so much lower. The likelihood that your friends live on the same street as you is very, very low. There's less mobility in how people move around. Very few people can, you know, buy up close to one another and all the rest of it, and have that support network in the way that perhaps that was easier decades ago.
No, I don't have dogs, but we did get kittens from the cat shelter last year. She's very, very fluffy. And I have to say, actually, me and my daughter, we really baby them. We pick them up, you know. So I can
tell you... But for you, they're supplementary to the children.
Benji ate the cupcakes. Look at that. It's terrible. Well, they're much more naughty than children.
But I suppose a bit more independent as well.
But they do sit up at the dinner table. My husband hates this.
Well, this segment was worth it for those photographs alone. Do stay with us here on Good Afternoon Britain. We'll be back with more news after the weather.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. One more fine day before the weather changes quite a bit for the weekends. The wet weather, in fact, already moving in later today across parts of Northern Ireland, courtesy of these weather fronts finally pushing away the high pressure that's brought many of us a fine spell through this week. And it's still pretty good out there today. Some thickening cloud across southern counties may produce 1 or 2 showers, but generally dry and bright, some good spells of sunshine. But it is clouding over across western Scotland, and there's those weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland, slowly trickling in, getting towards Belfast by the middle of the afternoon. afternoon. Temperature-wise, well, in the sunny spells, we could still get to 22, maybe 23 Celsius. Cooler around some coasts and where it is predominantly cloudy, and certainly feeling cooler as the rain seeps its way into Northern Ireland and trickles into western Scotland during this evening. Much of Scotland will stay fine through the evening rush hour, but that rain will be pushing on to the west coast. It's going to be a damp end to the day across Northern Ireland, and that rain spreading into parts of north and west Wales too. Further south and east, staying dry and fine, but even here it is going to cloud over, and that rain will be working into pretty much all areas as we go through the night. So if you're heading out this evening, just be prepared for that rain to be creeping its way across many western areas, getting to eastern England, eastern Scotland through the early hours, maybe even the odd heavier burst here and there. So a very different night, a very damp night and a very mild night. Last night we got down to -5 in Scotland. Tonight, most of us staying in double figures. So it will be a cold start to the weekend, but it will be a dull and a damp start. Now, this main area of rain is going to shimmy away pretty smartly. So for most places, tomorrow's a brightening up kind of day. There'll be some lifting of the cloud, maybe even a few sunny spells, but that could spark some heavy showers, perhaps over eastern England, northeast Scotland, 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland. So yes, there'll be some showers, but it should brighten up as we go through Saturday.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Someone is going to win the biggest prize package to date, and that someone could be you, driving away in this Elnag Baron 560 motorhome. It has plenty of room for your family of 4, comes complete with kitchen, bathroom and all the space you'll need for life on the road. Plus, we'll also give you a further £5,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. For another chance to win the lot, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB13 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 6th of June. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Got about another month to go.
So why did you decide to do it? Because I'll tell you what strikes me as being particularly interesting is that most people will not be familiar to seeing someone in your garb sitting on a bus. I mean, you will become a talking point. Is that part of it?
Well, the central part is not me, of course. The central part is the Hospital of St Cross, where I live, which is an absolutely wonderful place to live. And I'm thoroughly enjoying myself there.
Can I ask you, Brother John, how much planning has gone into this? Because I have to say, if I was catching a bus all around the country, I'd be very, very anxious about routes, about where I can get on the bus and timings, all that kind of stuff. So how much work has gone in behind the scenes?
Well, I started before Christmas, and of course, the problem is that at that time it was the winter bus schedules, and then we have the spring bus schedules, and we're now moving into the summer bus schedules. So it's all a bit touch and go. It's when you go along, it's how you get on. But basically, the first thing to do was to establish it was possible to do. So I worked out all the routes round. And I have to say that my bus pass isn't valid in Scotland and Wales, but I have the support of the bus companies, bus operators, who are being very kind and generous and allowing me free passage in Scotland and Wales, where I wouldn't otherwise be covered.
Oh, that's fantastic news. And I have to say, as though you look in excellent health and fair fettle, 85...
But I don't have a tattoo, you see. I don't have a tattoo.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 23rd of May. I'm Miriam Cates.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
We inherited a negotiation in which the principle of giving up UK sovereignty had already been conceded by the previous Tory government.
Chagos chaos. Well, Sir Keir Starmer hands over sovereignty of the islands to Mauritius, but there's now confusion over how much the deal will cost Britain.
I asked the Prime Minister yesterday how the government can find this money, but not money for people with disabilities. I'll tell you what he said shortly.
Elsewhere, could Trump save Britain's energy crisis? Well, the US president says that Britain should incentivise drilling in the North Sea and stop with the costly and unsightly windmills. But the energy minister, Miata van Buller, says the government has other plans.
We're really clear that we have to continue the work of getting bills down for good. And the only way we're going to do that is to break our reliance on global fossil fuel markets we have no control over.
And more on the small boat safety crisis. In a GB News exclusive, people smugglers are taking greater risks with the lives of migrants as they send them across the channel. Mark White is down in Dover.
Well, on the very day those senior maritime security sources issued that warning, people smugglers have pushed out a small boat into the English Channel as the storm front moves in. There are already heavy swells in the middle of the channel as that boat approaches UK waters.
And speaking of all matters maritime, not a single extra fish will be taken from UK waters as a result of Labour's Brexit reset. Well, that's what the minister behind Starmer's negotiations has told GB News. But is he telling porkies or perhaps fishies?
Here's Nick Thomas-Simmons right here. Is it the case that no more British fish were taken by those EU trawlers? Are fishermen here making a fuss about nothing?
And Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbelsing, says that trans children are more likely to be white and privileged. What do you think? Does she have a point? She's joining us later.
There's an extraordinary amount to cover today, not least a question of fish. When is not one extra fish not really one more extra fish?
Sounds like the beginning of a bad joke. I mean, I just remember back to the Brexit negotiations, which seemed a lifetime ago. But, of course, fish and fisheries was a really, really important part of that process. And to some extent, the previous government did just push the can down the road a little bit. And now, I was going to say chickens are coming home to roost, but I think we've exhausted the animal metaphors here.
Yeah, well, more from us at the Good Afternoon Britain menagerie later on in the programme. Do get in touch. gbnews.com/you'll say is, as always, the way to get involved. But for now, let's get your news headlines.
Good afternoon. The top stories just after 1 o'clock. US President Donald Trump is calling for the UK to increase and incentivise North Sea oil drilling. Writing on Truth Social, he says our negotiated deal with the United Kingdom is working out well for all. I strongly recommend to them, however, that in order to get their energy costs down, they stop with the costly and unsightly windmills and incentivise modernised drilling in the North Sea, where large amounts of oil lay waiting to be taken. That says energy bills in the UK will fall by 7% in July, the first drop for a year, energy regulator Ofgem's announced today. It means a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will see their annual bill fall by £129. The regulator's price cap, which is set every 3 months, sets a maximum that suppliers can charge for each unit of energy, affecting 21 million households in England, Scotland and Wales. Charities say cheaper bills are welcome, but many people still struggle to pay, with millions of customers collectively owing around $4 billion to suppliers. Ofgem makes the announcement following a price drop in gas and oil triggered by Donald Trump's tariffs. Elsewhere, 9 people suspected of working illegally in the UK have been arrested after Home Office immigration enforcement officers descended on a Surrey caravan park on Tuesday morning. The individuals, 5 Brazilian men, 1 Brazilian woman, 2 Indian men and an Indian woman, were arrested at the site in Green Lane following intelligence they were working illegally as delivery drivers in the gig economy. Currently, companies hiring gig economy and zero-hours workers are not legally required to check the status of these workers, but the government's changing the law so illegal workers' checks are expanded to bring them in line with other employers. The Telegraph is set to be sold to a transatlantic group led by Redbird Capital, ending 2 years of uncertainty over its future. The founder of the US private equity firm has signed a preliminary £500 million deal to take control of the historic publisher, with an additional agreement to deliver a, quote, significant investment in journalism. The deal comes after the government blocked a previous takeover attempt by Redbird last year amid fierce political backlash over press freedom concerns. And Manchester United have begun the process of telling staff they've lost their jobs just hours after the team's defeat in the Europa League final. Mail Sport understands that some of the 200 employees at risk of redundancy are being informed of their fate this week. Following the 1-0 loss at Tottenham, 2 Tottenham Old Trafford executives are cracking on with the club's cuts. Chief Executive Omar Barada told staff in February that more redundancies were on their way as part of a transformation plan aimed at returning the club to profitability. This followed 250 job losses last year. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
Welcome back. It's 6 minutes past 1, and fury continues after Sir Keir Starmer signed a so-called £30 billion surrender deal, handing over the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius.
Well, the government argues it secures national security and that without this deal, control of our crucial army base there could be lost via international court rulings.
Well, joining us now in the studio to go through the confusing details is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Now, Catherine, those who are against this deal, which does seem to be an awful lot of people, say that this is a surrender deal. We don't need to do this. It's only the advice of an international court that isn't binding that's telling the government to do this. But, of course, the government says it's essential. So who's right?
Well, it's very, very difficult to say, but I was at the press conference yesterday with the Prime Minister and John Healey, the Defence Secretary. Their line is, we have got absolutely no choice to do this. Yes, the current legal ruling from the International Court of Justice in 2019 is advisory, but there are coming down the line legally binding judgments in the next few months. If we don't act now, we'll be in breach of international law. We will then lose access to certain things on which we rely, satellite technology, and so on and so forth. They have made clear that they say that literally no choice at all. The Conservatives, of course, take a very, very different view.
And, of course, this has been a row that has been going for quite some time. Arguably, the Conservatives kicked off this process, but under Boris Johnson, you had an administration that was sort of, in effect, trying to kick the can down the road. And you also had the claim that when David Cameron became Foreign Secretary, he stopped the process that was occurring under previous foreign secretaries because he saw the deal as not being in the national interest. I mean, it does seem that when there is political will to delay, fudge, ignore, that can actually be arrived at.
Yes. They've taken a very different view, this government, to the previous one. And, of course, we've got Lord Hermer as Attorney General. We've got the Prime Minister, a human rights lawyer. They set a lot of store by the law, which made it, I think, all the more ironic that yesterday this announcement was delayed by 6 hours, this signing, by a legal challenge by 2 Chagosian women accusing the government of being in breach of human rights laws. Now, ultimately, the judge found in the government's favour. But looking at some of the Chagosians there that were there to protest, they feel absolutely appalled at the way they have been treated. Of course, they were booted off that island 60 years ago, not allowed to return. And in the judgment given yesterday lunchtime in London, the judge effectively said when one state is negotiating with another state, we don't have to consult these people. So I think that's difficult too.
Catherine, thank you very much. And we're joined now by somebody else who's been very vocal on this issue, former Defence Secretary Sir Grant Shapps. Grant, thank you so much for joining us. Now, you Is Grant with us? Can we see Grant? We don't have him yet, but he has intervened in the debate this morning, essentially saying that the government's claiming that there's all this top-secret classified information that explains why this deal is inevitable. But he was saying that he was party to that information when he was Defence Secretary, and he doesn't remember anything that does make the deal necessary.
This is the peculiar thing, because of course the government can always say, look, there's a really good reason we have to do this, but it's
We
secret.
can't tell you.
You don't know her. She goes to another school. That's the argument. That's the argument. The imaginary girlfriend argument of Sir Keir Starmer here on this issue.
And you were saying earlier that a lot of this is how much credence do you give to international law? And I think we do have Sir Grant Shapps on the line now. Grant, thank you so much for joining us. Now, of course, you were party to some of this classified information when you were Defence Secretary. Did you see anything in that that made you think that it was inevitable that we do some sort of deal with Mauritius?
Absolutely nothing. And I cannot keep quiet today whilst I hear the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary and other ministers going out and claiming there was some inevitability that we absolutely had to hand this sovereignty away, pay for the pleasure of doing so, and we discover in the small print, ask permission from the Mauritians, 2,000 kilometres away, whenever we take any military action from there. It's an outrageous claim by ministers. It's not true. I've been privy to all of the top secret information on this. I can't go into the details, but I can tell you that this is just a weak-willed approach, claiming that they had no choice when they absolutely had a choice to defend our sovereignty, and this is a disgraceful outcome.
What does the government mean, then, when they talk of the electromagnetic spectrum that is, of course, governed by a UN agency? They say that we could lose access to that spectrum that is so vital for satellite communications, for transmissions of all sorts of kinds, if the legal status of this island is put in jeopardy by the UN-regulated spectrum, so argues the Prime Minister, would also be in jeopardy.
I'm afraid the Prime Minister, a human rights lawyer, is just too prepared to follow whatever the lawyers happen to be recommending as advice, in the same way as when you're a minister, you listen to lawyers and you listen to solicitors, but you come to your own decisions when advisors advise. You don't simply cave in to whatever they say. Now, the original ruling by the International Court of Justice is an advisory ruling. It was made by, amongst others, one of the judges, Shui Hang-Xing. She was formerly of the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Do you really think that they were thinking about this through British eyes? I very much doubt it. And it was advisory. You know what? Our partners on the Chagos Islands, the people actually using it, the Americans, they don't even recognise the International Court of Justice. And this isn't some sort of Trump extreme. They've never signed up to the ICJ. So why on earth we feel that we have to hand away our sovereignty, pay for the privilege, and it turns out ask for permission when we use our own facilities to an island, to Mauritius, who have never, ever owned this, is beyond belief. And, you know, I can't quite decide whether it is the government being unpatriotic, not understanding the extent to which it's important that we look after our national security, or if they're just completely ignorant of the damage, which is in some ways just as bad or worse. I hope it's the latter, because if it's the former, then they're genuinely acting on behalf of those who seek to harm us.
Grant, how much of this do you think is to do with a certain political friendship between the Prime Minister and one of his oldest friends, Philip Sands KC? Philip Sands KC has been working for the Mauritian government on the side of this. He's known to be going to the football with the Prime Minister from time to time. He's the author of a book called The Last Colony, a tale of exile, justice and Britain's colonial legacy. And indeed, weirdly, in the agreement signed, there are right there on the first page are words about decolonisation and legacy. I mean, is this a political idea?
It's the only possible explanation for doing something which is so much in the interests of our own national strategic decline that there cannot be another reason for doing this. So, in other words, they have put their ideology ahead of our national and international security. They have handed something which will end up being in the influence overall of the Chinese, who are increasing their pressure on Mauritius, will end up with very little control what they do in some of these other islands. And this government has caved in to, as I say, a bunch of sort of lawyers, very much of the type that Keir Starmer might listen to, including, outrageously, somebody who's not declared their interest, but has written extensively about abandoning Britain's role in the world, which includes, I have to say, having bases in strategic locations around the world, which, in ways that I can't go into in huge detail, are immensely important to our national security. I think it's unbelievable that they paid tens of billions of pounds for this. If you think that the winter fuel payment that's caused so much fuss, it's about £2 billion a year. They're paying up to 100 billion, at least 30. It depends how you account for it, and it's certainly not the 3 billion that the government's trying to tell you.
Grant Shapps, thank you so much for joining us there. And of course, we did have Mike Tapp, Labour MP, on earlier, saying that had they not done this deal, it would become impossible to defend Diego Garcia, which I still don't quite understand. I'm not sure which country was going to invade the islands, but anyway, there's obviously a suspicion.
I mean, invading those islands where the British and the Americans are, I mean, declaring war on the United States of America. The last time a country tried to declare war on the United States of America, it did not go particularly well.
Exactly. Yes, well, it is, you know, I think lawyers live in a different world. Anyway, moving on. Senior maritime sources are exclusively telling GB News that people smuggling gangs are taking increasing risk with migrant lives.
Well, now border officials warn they're preparing to respond to an influx of further channel crossings today. So we've sent our man down to the scene. Mark White is there in Dover for us, our Home and Security editor, of course. And Mark, what's the movements today?
Well, of course, the very day that these senior maritime security sources warned us about how reckless the people smugglers are becoming by pushing these small boats out into the channel in conditions that are just not suitable for these flimsy vessels to try to make it across. We get exactly that. People smuggling gang down in Equan Plage, which is actually south of Boulogne, so a fair bit down the coast, have pushed a small boat out into the channel. It's been monitored by the French and is now just a minute or two away from making it to UK waters, having encountered, we're told, some heavy swells en route because a weather front is moving in now, and it's pretty rough out there. Apparently, according to sources, migrants on board, believed to be about 40, have been seen bailing out the front of that boat as it's being sort of swamped by water as it tries to make progress towards the UK line. But it's almost there now. The Border Force vessel Ranger is waiting for it, and as is now routine, much of course to the anger and annoyance of many in this country, those on board that vessel will be taken off the vessel and put on board the Border Force vessel Ranger for the journey back here to Dover Harbour and then off to processing. But yes, it's, I think, the perfect illustration really today of the kind of conditions where it looks calm enough out there, but it actually isn't. In the middle of the channel, there are significant swells. The Coast Guard plane has been up. It's been circling around that boat because of the real concerns that authorities had that it may get into the kind of trouble where migrants just end up in the water. 3 migrants have already been killed this week in separate incidents out there in the channel.
It is one of the world's busiest shipping lanes, as well as, of course, being subject to very up and down weather conditions. If the people smugglers, if the people controlling these gangs take too many risks, too many people die, then they won't have a business model. So what's encouraging them, do you think, to take ever-growing risks?
Well, the difficulty is you've got people smugglers who've been at this game for quite a number of years, international criminal gangs, who, in terms of the way that they respond and their business model, we don't really like to call them professional because, of course, they are criminals, but they are much more sort of practiced in the art of getting people safely across the channel than they ever were. They employ people within meteorology to give them accurate forecasts about the best conditions to push these boats out on. Of course, they've got robust supply lines going all the way back to the factories in China where they make the boats. But add to that what we've seen in recent years, which are other criminal gangs, people smugglers who are less professional in that sense, who don't really care, if any of them do really, about the safety of their customer base. They just want to push as many boats out as possible. Their supply lines are not as robust and they're not as plugged in to the likes of the weather conditions. And frankly, as I say, they don't care quite as much. If they think it's passable, like today, they'll push a boat out.
Really, really concerning stuff. Well, Mark White, thanks for being there for us all day, and keep your eyes peeled on those crossings.
Well, moving on now, and a well-known music talent agent and a drummer who played for bands including The Devil Wears Prada are among 6 people believed to have been killed in a plane crash in San Diego.
Yeah, really nasty stuff, this. The plane suddenly came down in a neighbourhood in the city early on Thursday morning, also setting fire to several houses and injuring 8 people on the ground.
Well, here to tell us more is aviation expert Sally Gethin. Sally, thank you so much for joining us. Now, I understand that it was quite foggy conditions and this may have contributed to the crash. Do we know any more?
Yeah, so what seems to have happened is that this small jet was actually overflying a canyon, which is basically a deep valley, before the accident. And therefore, it had to pitch up really quickly because the altitude changed of the terrain. So you imagine it's coming from a chasm, like a canyon, and then straight into a populated area, which is, you know, a few hundred feet higher than the canyon. And it clipped a power line. Now, in America, in a lot of these suburb places, you have you have a lot of pylons, a lot of overhead wires carrying electricity to the homes, and so it clipped that. And what people think is that are closer to the actual scene and more closely involved in this incident is that it clipped this overhead wire, and that's what downed the aircraft. There's also a concern that this small plane, it happened in the early hours of yesterday, and that it had been crisscrossing the United States, and it could have been down to pilot fatigue as well, because they'd done several legs on that journey. They'd crossed from the east coast of America over to San Diego on the other side of America.
Wow, that's a long old journey. I mean, that's basically a transatlantic crossing in terms of distance.
Yeah, they made a few stops on the way, like for refueling. But even so, I mean, the pilot himself is reputed to have been extremely experienced and skilled. But at the same time, if you do suffer fatigue, and it was a single pilot operating all those flights in succession, and also we have to look at whether there was an automated system in place to direct the aircraft on its final approach to glide into the airport, or whether it was an instrument approach, which is a more manual way of doing things. And if it was the instrument approach, then there's a higher risk attached when you're overflying a canyon and there's that sudden change in terrain where it's much higher as you come out. And also the foggy conditions, as you pointed out, may have contributed to a loss of orientation by the pilot as well. Or possibly it could be technical with the airplane itself.
Sally, what are the regulations about flying hours for pilots? How long are they allowed to fly without taking a break? Are there different regulations for private planes to commercial?
So obviously it's very highly regulated, and with commercial flying, you do get pilot fatigue, but it's very highly regulated. But when you have what we call general aviation, as it's known, yes, you still have to stick to the flying, the limits. But at the same time, there's, because they're independent operators, so, it's possible for them perhaps to push themselves further than, would be perhaps discernible with a commercial flight. But I think the other aspect to this is, the decimation of those houses and the destruction. People were seriously injured, and it's a miracle that people weren't killed on the ground, because it was a densely populated suburban area. And of course, there's a lot of scrutiny now in the United States on the regulation of aviation safety and airspace management. We've got a new administration, as we all know. We've got a new transportation secretary who reports to the White House, to President Trump, and he's been very vocal and belligerent lately, saying how he's going to overhaul air traffic management and aviation safety in the United States, because the headlines haven't been good. I mean, a helicopter dropped into the Hudson very recently, if you recall, and there's been a number of quite big catastrophes lately hitting the headlines.
Yeah, it's incredibly strange. Well, Sally Gethin, thanks for giving us the lowdown on all of that. Aviation expert, of course. Thanks for joining us.
Well, you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show.
Yes, Britain's strictest head teacher, Catherine Birbal-Singh, says that transgender children are more likely to be white and privileged. What do you think? Does she have a point? Well, she joins us later on.
And after the break, not a single extra fish will be taken from UK fishing waters as a result of the Labour government's Brexit reset deal. That's what the minister behind Keir Starmer's negotiations has told GB News. But how on earth will that work?
This is our country, and we think it's amazing. From high tea to the high street, we love it all. Even the rain, we like that too. There's nowhere else we'd rather be. That's why we're here to be the fearless champion of Britain, its voices and its values. Because we are GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
The fact is Trump made a good start, no.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints. How many fingers have I got up?
About 10.
So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun. No, he didn't say that, though. I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nigel is back.
Good evening.
Unfiltered.
Are these proposals bold enough?
Uncompromising.
Will it bring growth?
Unmissable.
We as a country are brilliant.
Nigel Farage returns. Coming soon. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Some breaking news for you now. Donald Trump has said he wants to impose a 50% tariff on the European Union, starting from the 1st of June.
Well, in a post on his social media platform Truth Social, which has dramatically and immediately escalated a trade war between two of the world's largest economies, the US president said the European Union, which was formed for the primary purpose of taking advantage of the United States on trade, has been very difficult to deal with.
This is an extraordinary intervention from the president. Of course, those negotiations had been underway, but Donald Trump saying the negotiations are going nowhere, criticising the fines that the EU has placed on American tech companies, saying that they're acting uncompetitively. Well, let's speak to our Westminster... let's go to Westminster and speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope, there, for some immediate reaction. Christopher, this is a huge move from President Trump, and frankly, the stock markets are not going to like it.
This is absolutely seismic. 50% tariffs on EU exports to America from a week on Sunday. Look at the language here from the US President Donald Trump. The EU, he says, which was formed for the primary purpose of taking advantage of the United States on trade, has been very difficult to deal with, he says. There are powerful trade barriers, VAT taxes, VAT, corporate penalties, non-monetary trade barriers, monetary manipulation, unfair and unjustified lawsuits against American companies have led to a trade deficit with the US of more than $250 million a year, which is totally unacceptable. The President goes on, discussions have been difficult. Therefore, I'm recommending a straight 50% tariff on the EU starting on the 1st of June. He adds no tariff on products built or manufactured in the United States. To repeat, this starts a week on Sunday. Now, what does it mean for the UK? We have just completed a Brexit reset deal with the European Union, agreed and announced by the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, on Monday. There are concerns about that deal. Have we been stitched up like a kipper, like I asked him for the PM for GBNews on Monday? I've spoken to Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's the architect of the deal, the Cabinet Office Minister. He says no, and of course on the issue of fish, the fisheries access, he says 12 years during that period, not a single extra British fish would be taken by Spanish or French trawlers. But Tom, what's happening here is it will draw attention to the fact we are getting closer to the European Union through this deal. We're paying for access to the single market. Is that wise as the US escalates a trade war with the European Union? I mean, Tom and Miriam, big question marks, I think, as we go into the weekend.
Absolutely huge. I wonder, though, will people see this as a negotiating tactic, something to bring the European Union back to the table, try and stop them fining the Apples and Googles of this world, to try and perhaps get a better terms of trade? Am I being too optimistic here?
I think that's what many think. I mean, since you're seeing on screen there when Donald Trump announced those tariffs initially on Liberation Day and the markets tanked, the markets have recovered all of the losses since that happened, as Trump himself has walked back some of those big tariffs he imposed, notably getting a better deal with China for the US. He's all about outcome. What we know about Trump now is where is he going, what's he want. He doesn't want to increase the cost of items exported, notably cars, I imagine, to the US from the EU. But he wants a better deal for America. He wants it quickly. He's got basically 2 years of his time before he risks becoming a lame duck when we have those midterm elections taking place. So he's in a rush to get a better deal, a result for ordinary Americans, and that's where he's going with this. But yeah, I mean, big question marks here about whether the UK should get closer to the EU at the same time as the trade war is starting.
And suddenly Ed Davies' proposal that we join the EU's tariff area, their customs union, seems to be a pretty bad idea by the looks of it.
Right now, it looks like a non-starter. But in this a podcast called Chopper's Political Podcast, we have put out the weekly for GB News viewers and listeners. It's very clear from Nick Thomas-Symonds, the goal is not to re-enter the single market or customs union. They say it clearly. They've turned the page. They're trying to find a new deal that doesn't involve those two areas.
Well, Christopher Hope, thank you very much for your analysis there on that breaking news. And yes, it does seem it will just be another bargaining chip. All the EU officials will now be rushing to try and get a stay of execution, an extension like China did. Well, we'll see. But he certainly knows how to make headlines, doesn't he, Donald Trump?
Certainly does. Well, we'll be discussing that more, of course, throughout the show. But elsewhere, Tottenham Hotspur will celebrate their first European trophy for 41 years with an open-top bus parade in North London. We'll be there live.
But after the break, Britain's strictest headmistress, Catherine Birbalsingh, says that trans children are more likely to be white and privileged. What do you think? Does she have a point? Well, she's joining us later, all after your latest headlines.
Good afternoon. The top stories this hour. President Donald Trump says he's recommending imposing 50% tariffs on goods from the European Union being imported to the United States starting on the 1st of June. Our discussions with Brussels are going nowhere, he said in a post on social media today. The announcement marks an escalation of Trump's trade war with the EU, which currently has a 10% tariff on all goods being brought into America. The president also threatened to impose a 25% import tax on iPhones not manufactured in America. Meanwhile, President Trump is calling for the UK to increase and incentivise North Sea oil drilling. Writing on Truth Social, he says our negotiated deal with the United Kingdom is working out for all. I strongly recommend to them, however, that in order to get their energy costs down, they stop with the costly and unsightly windmills and incentivise modernised drilling in the North Sea, where large amounts of oil lay waiting to be taken. That's as energy bills in the UK will fall by 7% in July, the first drop for a year. It means a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will see their annual bill fall by £129. The regulator's price cap, which is set every 3 months, sets the maximum that suppliers can charge for each unit of energy, affecting 21 million households in England, Scotland and Wales. Charities say cheaper bills are welcome, but many people still struggle to pay, with millions of customers collectively owing about £4 billion to suppliers. Ofgem makes the announcement following a price drop in gas and oil triggered by Donald Trump's tariffs. And the Telegraph is set to be sold to a transatlantic group led by Redbird Capital, ending 2 years of uncertainty over its future. The founder of the US private equity firm has signed a preliminary £500 million deal to take control of the historic publisher, with an additional agreement to deliver a, quote, significant investment in journalism. The deal comes after the government blocked a previous takeover attempt by Redbird last year amid fierce political backlash over press freedom concerns. And those are the latest headlines for now. More from me at 2 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Done. My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.3483 and €1.1912. Price of gold is £2,488.96 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 8,619 points.
Done. My Claim Group sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. One more fine day before the weather changes quite a bit for the weekends. The wet weather, in fact, already moving in later today across parts of Northern Ireland, courtesy of these weather fronts finally pushing away the high pressure that's brought many of us a fine spell through this week. And it's still pretty good out there today. Some thickening cloud across southern counties may produce 1 or 2 showers, but generally dry and bright, some good spells of sunshine. But it is clouding over across western Scotland, and there's those weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland, slowly trickling in, getting towards Belfast by the middle of the afternoon. Temperature-wise, well, in the sunny spells, we could still get to 22, maybe 23 Celsius. Cooler around some coasts and where it is predominantly cloudy, and certainly feeling cooler as the rain seeps its way into Northern Ireland and trickles into western Scotland during this evening. Much of Scotland will stay fine through the evening rush hour, but that rain will be pushing on to the west coast. It's going to be a damp end to the day across Northern Ireland, and that rain spreading into parts of north and west Wales too. Further south and east, staying dry and and fine. But even here, it is going to cloud over, and that rain will be working into pretty much all areas as we go through the night. So if you're heading out this evening, just be prepared for that rain to be creeping its way across many western areas, getting to eastern England, eastern Scotland through the early hours, maybe even the odd heavier burst here and there. So a very different night, a very damp night and a very mild night. Last night we got down to -5 in Scotland. Tonight, most of us staying in double figures. So it will be a cold start to the weekend, but it will be a dull and a damp start. Now, this main area of rain is going to shimmy away pretty smartly. So for most places, tomorrow's a brightening up kind of day. There'll be some lifting of the cloud, maybe even a few sunny spells, but that could spark some heavy showers, perhaps over eastern England, northeast Scotland, 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland. So yes, there'll be some showers, but it should brighten up as we go through Saturday.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon, this is the latest AI travel news from gbnews.com. The A725 southbound off-slip to B7012 Main Street in Blantyre is closed due to roadworks. A signed diversion advises extra journey time as the southbound on-slip from A724 Glasgow Road is closed. Delays of 50 minutes are reported on the A1 southbound between the M62 and A639 due to a broken down vehicle. In Holton, the M56 westbound between junctions 12 and 14 has 2 lanes closed after a collision. And on the trains, Transport for Wales reports no service between Hereford and Craven Arms, while the Gatwick Express is not operating. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Welcome back. It's 20 minutes to 2, and the woman dubbed Britain's strictest head teacher has claimed that transgender children are more likely to be white and privileged.
Well, Catherine Burble-Singh, the head of Michaela Community School in Wembley, also claimed her school was unlikely to have any trans children because it's mainly ethnic minority intake, and added that victimhood is admired in our society.
Well, we're now joined by Catherine Burble-Singh to discuss this further. Catherine, thank you so much for joining us. You must be gearing up for half-term. Now, you made these comments that many will think are quite controversial. Can you unpack what you mean? Why are trans-identified children more likely to come from white or more privileged groups?
Yes, well, I was asked by the journalist if we have any trans children at Michaela, and I said no, and he said, well, why do you think that's the case? And I think, well, the vast majority of them are ethnic minority. And I do think that will have impact. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about adults. There are trans men and women who are adults, and I imagine there are just as many in all the different races, just as there are same-sex attracted people in all the different races, and I imagine there would be no reason why there'd be more in one group than the other. But we are talking about children who are different. And the reason why with children it's different is that there's lots of children who get caught up in fads. And while, of course, there will be some genuinely trans children out there, when I'm saying trans to the journalist, I'm putting quotation marks, but of course you don't see that in the writing when it ends up in the newspaper. There are lots of children who end up caught up in fads, as we've seen, some who think that they are dogs or they think that they're snow leopards. I've got a little Year 7 boy at the moment who thinks he's a detective and goes on the train and encounters the police and does all sorts of, because he thinks he's a detective. Now, the fact is that children do these sorts of things and they can get caught up because they're socially pressured into doing so, or the media encourages them. They're online, they see certain discussions and they're vulnerable to that sort of thing. Now, then we need to ask ourselves which children are most vulnerable to the idea of transitioning, and children who I don't think in the end will ever properly transition. What I mean is actually become of the other gender. They just, in their school days, will be in that moment of transitioning. And the children who I think are most vulnerable to these are the children who don't necessarily have a claim to victimhood. So anecdotally, I just know that there are a lot more children who are transitioning, and I do it with my quotation marks again, in private schools, white children in private schools, white children who are more privileged in our comprehensives, And this is because I would put this down to them feeling that they need something to be kind of valued in terms of a victim. And I do feel we have a society nowadays where we very much admire victimhood. People can climb that social ladder when they are the bigger victim. And so this enables those children who are feeling under pressure because they're a bit too posh, they're a bit too white, they're a bit too male, that they then say, oh, well, actually, I'm not really, let me transition. But then by the time they're 20 years old, that will no longer be the case. So that is what I meant.
Catherine, there is another group that does seem to be particularly likely to be caught up in this, and that is children in care. So in the Cass review, in the Cass report, Hilary Cass pointed out that children who are adopted or brought up in care are about 8 times as likely to be referred to the gender clinics at Tavistock, which is now closed. Why do you think that might be?
Well, I mean, those children are crying out for support and for attention in a million different ways. So I imagine that it won't just be that they are thinking about transitioning. They'll be appearing on the stats for all kinds of issues. So, that's a different issue. That I'm talking about the children who I think will be wanting to be seen as victims. You're talking about children who are really in genuine need of support, both psychologically and then just in a million different ways.
Yeah, well, Catherine Birbalsingh, thanks indeed for joining us and talking through that news that actually at Michaela there are no transgender children. And it is interesting sort of to see where there are, where there aren't, where the affirmation approach perhaps is inappropriate, and being able to let people sort of live off their lives in the way that they want to, but also with off-ramps if they need them.
Well, in some schools, children who come out as trans, in quotation, are given celebratory assemblies and called brave and given special status. And it's unsurprising that children find that attractive. But like you say, there's then no off-ramp, because what do you do when you've told your whole school that this is your new identity and you change your mind?
Well, lots to think on there, but also lots more to discuss in today's programme. Indeed, if you've ever felt like you want to sort of get away from it all, perhaps you want to travel to somewhere that is now going to be faced with 50% tariffs from Donald Trump. Yes, it's Europe. Let's look at the weather there.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
There's the chance of a little bit of light rain in Sicily over the course of the weekend. Small chance of some showers in Mallorca as well. Plenty of sunshine for Greece. That should continue for the next few days. We've seen some wet weather across Croatia recently, but the showers here are also clearing. There's that thicker cloud and patchy rain that may affect Sicily. 1 or 2 showers for Mallorca and Menorca. Small chance of a shower or two in southern Spain as well, but generally Spain and Portugal and the Canaries set fair with plenty of sunshine for the next few days.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
No matter the state it's in, this is our nation. Join me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, for a genuine, honest discussion on where we have been, where we are going, and where we are with the people who set the direction. That's State of the Nation every Monday and Tuesday at 8 o'clock, only on GB News, the People's Channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
A very good morning to you. And if you're planning to visit one of Britain's many beauty spots next bank holiday or Easter weekend, beware of your car.
Yeah, a rising number of tourist attractions are banning coaches and some cars to help ease overcrowding.
We're here to debate if vehicles should be stopped from parking near attractions. Government Relations Manager at the Countryside Alliance, David Bean, and founder of Fairfuel UK campaign, Howard Cox. Good morning to you both.
David, how much of a problem are tourists when there are too many of them and they bring their great camper vans and they park all their cars in a line so you actually can't see the beauty spot you went to see? How
It
much
can
of a
be a
problem is it?
significant problem in certain areas. I'm in Scotland for the holidays, and particularly in areas such as the Highlands and Islands, there are areas that have very, very badly been affected. Even some camper vans end up getting taken out to certain places on the islands and then just abandoned after a holiday is finished.
Honestly, this is horses for courses, and to be fair, you know, I actually do believe that we need better signage, better planning, and Cameron hit the nail on the head. You can't get to these beauty spots unless you have some sort of transport to get there. And, you know, public transport is woeful across the country in these areas. Obviously, yesterday in the Berlin Gap one, you can't legislate for idiots. It needs better signage, better information, but if you take people away from it, you take income away from the community. You know, I think any organisation that's promoting a beauty spot that's making money out of it should be paying for better signage, better parking facilities, etc. I do not like the idea of cars being, you know, queuing up illegally, you could say. That's ridiculous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 10 to 2, and British students will no longer be able to attend Harvard University after Donald Trump has banned foreign students from applying to the prestigious institution.
Well, the decision also means that existing British students must transfer to other schools in the United States or lose their right to stay in the country.
And in the last few minutes, we're hearing that Harvard University is suing the Trump administration over this ban.
Well, let's get the thoughts of the US political commentator Laurie Laird on this, and I hope also on the tariff news as well, if you don't mind, Laurie. But it's all happening in the Trump world today. Let's start with Harvard. I mean, this was fairly out of the blue, was it not?
Yeah, this really caught me by surprise. I mean, look, this administration has made no secret that it's fairly dissatisfied with Harvard University, also Columbia University, which is another elite Ivy League institution. But this really comes as an utter shock. And basically, the 27% of international students at Harvard will, depending on how this plays out in the courts, may not be able to re-enroll next year. It could be a real scramble, as you mentioned, for this large number of students to find somewhere else to go. And as you mentioned, UK students, about 4% of Harvard's international student population is from the UK.
And what's the reasoning behind this? Is this all to do with the left-wing protests that have been taking place at Harvard and Trump's linking that with the number of foreign students at the university? What's the reasoning behind his action?
Excellent question, and you'd think I might have an answer for that. Trump has been so frustrated at Harvard, and Harvard has not. Columbia, which is in Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, was the first in its sight, and Columbia did accede to some of the administration's demands on reforming some of its departments, talking to the administration about hiring of professors. They still had funding taken away, so Harvard saw that, and when they were threatened with the withdrawal of funding, they fought back, and it looks like the administration is fairly frustrated by that, and they have now escalated this and is not going to allow Harvard to enroll foreign students. But the statement explaining this came from the Department of Homeland Security, and it was a bizarre statement. It was almost emotional. It's not the sort of government speak that you're used to seeing. It talked about this being a warning to other universities. It mentioned
Laura,
violence.
I hope you won't mind, I'm cutting across to you just in our final minutes. I do want to get your thoughts on this 50% tariff rate Donald Trump has just announced on the European Union.
Yeah, another bugbear for Donald Donald Trump, the European Union, and Harvard University. This really surprises me. And Donald Trump has said this 50% tariff, which could come in at the beginning of next month, it goes against his previous policy. Remember, there was going to be that 90-day discussion period, which takes you to July 8th, but that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. So yes, we could be looking at these heavy tariffs from EU products from the beginning of next month. It's a real surprise. And he wants to tariff any iPhones, Apple products that aren't made in the US either.
In the pre-market, it looks like Apple shares are taking a pounding, but we will be looking at the New York Stock Exchange when it opens in around half an hour's time. But Laurie Laird, thanks indeed for talking about those two breaking issues there here on Good Afternoon Britain.
He's only been the president for, 4 or 5 months, and he's completely changed the way of politics. Well, we're having lots more coming up after this break. Do stay with us.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. One more fine day before the weather changes quite a bit for the weekends. The wet weather, in fact, already moving in later today across parts of Northern Ireland, courtesy of these weather fronts finally pushing away the high pressure that's brought many of us a fine spell through this week. And it's still pretty good out there today. Some thickening cloud across southern counties may produce 1 or 2 showers, but generally dry and bright, some good spells of sunshine. But it is clouding over across western Scotland, and there's those weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland, slowly trickling in, getting towards Belfast by the middle of the afternoon. Temperature-wise, well, in the sunny spells, we could still get to 22, maybe 23 Celsius. Cooler around some coasts and where it is predominantly cloudy, and certainly feeling cooler as the rain seeps its way into Northern Ireland and trickles into western Scotland during this evening. Much of Scotland will stay fine through the evening rush hour, but that rain will be pushing on to the west coast. It's going to be a damp end to the day across Northern Ireland, and that rain spreading into parts of north and west Wales too. Further south and east, staying dry and fine, but even here it is going to cloud over, and that rain will be working into pretty much all areas as we go through the night. So if you're heading out this evening, just be prepared for that rain to be creeping its way across many western areas, getting to eastern England, eastern Scotland through the early hours, maybe even the odd heavier burst here and there. So a very different night, a very damp night and a very mild night. Last night we got down to -5 in Scotland. Tonight, most of us staying in double figures. So it will be a cold start to the weekend, but it will be a dull and a damp start. Now, this main area of rain is going to shimmy away pretty smartly. So for most places, tomorrow's a brightening up kind of day. There'll be some lifting of the cloud, maybe even a few sunny spells, but that could spark some heavy showers, perhaps over eastern England, northeast Scotland, 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland. So yes, there'll be some showers, but it should brighten up as we go through Saturday.
A positive outlook through the night will power through to a bright day ahead. Boxed Home Battery Storage, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You could be driving away with this brand new Elnag Baron 560 motorhome. It comfortably sleeps 4, comes with Skyroof, integrated kitchen and bathroom, and is worth over £67,000. And that's not all, as we'll also give you a further £5,000 in tax-free cash to make sure that wherever this motorhome takes you, it takes you there in style. For another chance to win the lot, text WIN to 63225. One entry costs £2.50 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63225. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start at £2.50. Call 0903 686 3232. Calls cost £2.50 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB13 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 4 p.m. on the 6th of June. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk then?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
In fact, has Trump made a good start? No.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up? About 10.
So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m. only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What is the state of our economy? What is the state of our National Health Service? What is the state of our schools?
What on earth is going on?
Understanding Britain means understanding the state we are in. This is State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin, Wednesdays, Thursdays and Fridays from 8 p.m. on GB News.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m. weekdays here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 23rd of May. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates.
Well, breaking in the last hour, Donald Trump has said he wants to impose a 50% tariff on the European Union and all its exports, starting on the 1st of June. But will Britain be caught in the crossfire?
That's right. Donald Trump imposes 50% tariffs on exports to the US from a week on Sunday, days after Sir Keir Starmer's Brexit reset deal. Will our Prime Minister regret getting closer to Brussels?
And more news breaking in just the last few minutes. Harvard University sues the Trump administration after it blocked foreign students from enrolling.
We inherited a negotiation in which the principle of giving up UK sovereignty had already been conceded by the previous Tory government.
It's very international today, yes, Chagos chaos. Well, Sir Keir Starmer hands over the sovereignty of those British islands to Mauritius, but there's confusion over how much the deal will cost.
Well, 100 million a year, but is it 3.4 billion altogether, as the Prime Minister says, or more than 30 billion? I'll try to make sense of that shortly. Either way, a lot of money.
And could Trump have the answer to Britain's energy crisis? Well, the US president says Britain should incentivise drilling in the North Sea and drop with the costly and unsightly windmills. But earlier, the energy minister said that the government has other plans.
Really clear that we have to continue the work of getting bills down for good. And the only way we're going to do that is to break our reliance on global fossil fuel markets we have no control over.
News. Tottenham Hotspur will celebrate their first European trophy for 41 years with an open-top bus parade in North London. And we'll be there live.
Well, it's certainly a busy news day, Tom. 2 breaking stories just while we've been on air.
It's sometimes hard to remember that Donald Trump is not actually president of this country, given how much he dominates our news agenda. I'm looking at all of those stories, whether it's what we do with our energy, of course he had a role in the Chagos thing, whether it's what happens with our nearest trading partner in the tariffs that he's imposing on them,
our
and
university
British students at Harvard as well. I mean, why is the world we live in the Donald Trump world?
Well, it's globalisation, Tom. I mean, it does kind of demonstrate how interconnected every country is global trade, and that although many people say we're now in a multipolar world, America's no longer the big superpower, they nevertheless sure have a lot of impact still.
They certainly do, and I have to say, whenever Xi Jinping has a sort of peculiar thought or decides to do something, can't say it quite dominates all of the news in this country in the same way that Donald Trump can and
But
does.
it is partly because he's such an erratic figure, or at least it seems to be the case, tweeting different things that change the markets and then changing his mind. I mean, perhaps it is all part of a broader strategy, but it certainly keeps newsreaders on their toes.
Certainly does. Well, we'll be trying to make sense of everything that is going on between this country, the United States and everything in between. Do get involved in the comments section. Do you think this tariff on the EU is a negotiating stroke of genius, or is it going to wipe off billions of dollars from the stock market? Perhaps both. Well, gbnews.com/you'll say is the way to get involved. All to come after your latest news headlines.
Tom, thank you. The top stories. President Donald Trump says he's recommending imposing 50% tariffs on goods from the European Union being imported to the United States starting on the 1st of June. Our discussions with Brussels are going nowhere, he said in a post on social media today. The announcement marks an escalation of Trump's trade war with the EU, which currently has a 10% tariff on all goods being brought into America. The EU Commission on Friday today has declined to comment, saying it would wait until a phone call between the EU trade chief and his US counterpart to take place a little later today. The president also threatened to impose a 25% import tax on iPhones not manufactured in America. Meanwhile, President Trump's calling for the UK to increase and incentivise North Sea oil drilling. Writing on Truth Social, he says our negotiated deal with the UK is working out well for all. I strongly recommend to them, however, that in order to get their energy costs down, they stop with the costly and unsightly windmills and incentivise modernised drilling in the North Sea, where large amounts of oil lay waiting to be taken. That as energy bills in the UK will fall by 7% in July, the first drop for a year. It means a household using a typical amount of gas and electricity will see their annual bill fall by £129. Households are being urged to shop around for cheaper energy deals, though, despite prices falling from July. Ofgem says shopping around could lead to a £200 annual saving, but anyone currently on a fixed deal will not benefit from the fall this summer. The regulator's price cap sets a maximum that suppliers can charge for each unit of energy, affecting 21 million households in England, Scotland and Wales. Charities say cheaper bills are welcome, but many people still struggle to pay, with millions of customers collectively owing about £4 billion to suppliers. Under Secretary of State at the Department for Energy Security, Miata Fanbula, says it's a big relief for families under pressure with the cost of living, but more needs to go further.
But we're really clear that we have to continue the work of getting bills down for good. And the only way we're going to do that is to break our reliance on global fossil fuel markets we have no control over and deliver clean, homegrown energy. And we are working flat out to deliver that. And we're also really clear that as we make that transition, we've got to do the job of supporting households. And that's why we're looking to expand the Warm Homes discount to over 6 million households. And that's why we're doing the work of upgrading hundreds of thousands of homes.
And some breaking news this hour. Harvard University sues the Trump administration after it revoked the university's ability to enrol international students. More on this breaking story as soon as we get it. Elsewhere, 9 people suspected of working illegally in the UK have been arrested after Home Office immigration enforcement officers descended on a Surrey caravan park on Tuesday morning. The individuals, 5 Brazilian men, 1 Brazilian woman, 2 Indian men and an Indian woman were arrested at the site in Green Lane following intelligence they were working illegally as delivery drivers in the gig economy. Currently, companies hiring gig economy and zero-hours workers are not legally required to check the status of these workers, but the government's changing the law, so illegal working checks are expanded to bring them in line with other employers. The Israeli Prime Minister has launched an attack on Sir Keir Starmer and the leaders of France and Canada, saying they had effectively said they want Hamas to remain in power. He also accused Sir Keir Starmer, Macron and Mark Carney of siding with mass murderers, rapists, baby killers and kidnappers. Addressing yesterday's attack on the Israeli embassy staff in Washington, Netanyahu said the leaders of some of Israel's closest allies wanted Israel to stand down and accept that terror group Hamas's army of mass murderers will survive. Downing Street has so far not responded directly, but pointed to Sakir's earlier condemnation of the Washington attack. In that post, Sakir called anti-Semitism an evil we must stamp out. In other news, the Telegraph is set to be sold to a transatlantic group led by Redbird Capital, ending 2 years of uncertainty over its future. The founder of the US private equity firm has signed a preliminary £500 million deal to take control of the publisher, with an additional agreement to deliver a significant investment in journalism. The deal comes after the government blocked a previous takeover attempt by Redbird last year, amid fierce political backlash over press freedom concerns. And Manchester United have begun the process of telling staff they've lost their jobs just hours after the team's defeat in the Europa League final. Mail Sport understands that some of the 200 employees at risk of redundancy are being informed of their fate this week. Following the 1-0 loss to Tottenham, Old Trafford executives are cracking on with the club's cuts. Chief Executive Omar Barada told staff in February that more redundancies were on the way as part of a transformation plan aimed at returning the club to profitability. This followed 250 job losses last year. Those are the latest headlines for now. More from me at 2:30.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 2, and Donald Trump has said he wants to impose a 50% tariff on the European Union, starting from the 1st of June.
Yes, in a post on his social media platform Truth Social, which has dramatically and immediately escalated a trade war between two of the world's largest economies, the US president said that the European Union, which was formed for the primary purpose of taking advantage of the United States on trade, has been very difficult to deal with.
Well, let's go live to Westminster now and speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, this came out of the blue today. We were given to understand there had been negotiations between the US and the EU, but clearly Donald Trump has waded in and blown them up.
This is absolutely huge, isn't it? I mean, it comes just the week, in fact, that the UK signed a deal to get closer to the European Union single market, to pay for access to that market through an undisclosed figure on admin costs, to give the European Union 12 years of access to British waters. And then this happens. I mean, this certainly is a challenge to Keir Starmer. Who are you going to pick? Are you happy being outside the European Union? Let's look at those remarks, though, there from the President of the United States. The EU, he says, which was formed for the primary purpose of taking advantage of the United Kingdom on trade, has been very difficult to deal with. The US has been very difficult to deal with. Their powerful trade barriers, VAT taxes, corporate penalties, non-monetary trade barriers, monetary manipulation, unfair and unjustified lawsuits against American companies have led to a trade deficit with the US of more than $250 million a year, which is totally unacceptable, the US president says. He goes on, discussions have been going on, therefore I'm recommending a straight 50% tariff on the EU starting June the 1st. That's a week on Sunday. No tariffs, he says, on products built in the United States. A huge deal here. We're watching quite closely to the US markets opening at 2:30 p.m. We'll have that live for you on GB News. Huge questions too now. Where does it leave, for example, the Northern Ireland? Northern Ireland sits in both the European Union's purview in terms of trade and the UK. What happens to Northern Ireland? Yet again, another question to be asked. Unclear now, but frankly, dramatic news here.
It is dramatic news, but also, judging by Trump's recent history, it could just be posturing, a way of getting the EU officials back to the table, banging their heads together, bringing some urgency to the negotiations. We could be sitting here in another week's time, and there's been an extension of 90 days, and they're all back to the negotiating table. How likely do you think that is?
Well, judging by his form since Liberation Day, when he unveiled all of those different tariffs, that is quite likely. The markets tanked then, and now they are back above where they were before Liberation Day. So you might say the markets know that he's got a goal here to get a better deal for the United States. He then does actions which get him there. He doesn't want to make life more expensive for people in his voters in the America, but equally he wants to reshore jobs into the US. So what it means for pharmaceutical companies in Ireland, for example, or those big US companies who have outsourced their manufacturing and even their tax offices to Ireland, will they have to be reshored to the United States? That's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get a reaction, but no question, Miriam, he does these things now for an effect. We are reacting for him as the media, and let's see how long he keeps it going for.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Well, Christopher Hope, political editor, thanks indeed for joining us and talking through that breaking news.
Well, the fury is continuing after the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has signed a so-called £30 billion surrender deal, handing over the sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. Well, the government argues that it will secure our national security, and without this deal, control of the vital army base could be lost via international courts.
Well, joining us in the studio to go through the gory details is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Because, Catherine, you were there at the press conference yesterday, and there was quite a lot of it that didn't seem to, at face value, make sense.
Yes, exactly. So the Prime Minister stood there and he said this deal is going to cost us an average of £100 million a year. It's a 99-year lease, so you would think 100 million times 100 years would be 10 billion. But then he said the total cost to the United Kingdom is 3.4 billion, which would seem to be only about a third of that. Now, apparently, technically that is correct because of something called net present values. Basically, the way the government is scoring it, considering sort of what it would cost now, but factoring in, you know, inflation and devaluation going forward decades, that is correct. But there is another way of scoring it, which would give you an entirely different figure. Some reports today suggesting if you've got 10 billion, that's 100 years by 100 million, and then you're factoring in 2% inflation, that the total cost is more like 30 billion. Either way, it's an awful lot of money considering we are paying to give away something which was our sovereign territory and then lease back the military base, which is critically important to us and to the US, from Mauritius.
Now, some might say this is a bit of creative accounting, but on the security front, we've heard from Labour representatives that they had to do this deal because otherwise, in a matter of weeks, this very security of the base could have become indefensible. But it's unclear which nation is keen to attack the base there. What do they mean by this?
It is unclear, and it's a very different approach to that which the Conservatives took. And we had Grant Shapps a little bit earlier on your programme saying I was given all this similar advice, but, you know, we didn't have to act on it. The government is saying that, sure, we've got this current advisory judgment from the International Court of Justice saying that we should hand these islands back to Mauritius. The government is saying that if they don't do this deal right now, that in the coming months there would be legally binding judgments. At that point, we'd be breaking international law, and at that point, systems on which we rely on to do with satellite communication and so on and so forth that are vital, we would start to lose access to, and the base would become inoperable. They're also saying that without the deal, there'd be nothing to stop Mauritius allowing China to set up a base or, you know, bad actors to get close to the island. They're saying they've got a 24-mile buffer zone now around Diego, the military base on Diego Garcia. It's all difficult to fathom, really, and I think part of it is the fact that it's matters of national security. A lot of information will be classified, and we don't have access to that.
OK, well,
Indeed.
Catherine Forster, thanks for joining us. So much more coming on today's programme. In fact, we're going to go live to the Frankfurt Stock Exchange to see the effects of that announcement of new tariffs on the EU. We can see some live pictures here, and wow, that is a whack in the value of those shares being traded over in Frankfurt.
But also after the break, could Trump save Britain's energy problems? Well, the US president says that Britain should incentivise drilling in the North Sea and stop with the costly and unsightly windmills.
This is our country, and we think it's amazing. From high tea to the high street, we love it all. Even the rain. We like that too. There's nowhere else we'd rather be. That's why We're here to be the fearless champion of Britain, its voices and its values. Because we are GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Are these two things linked? Is an excess of belly fat perhaps hindering our children's education?
Good morning. So you're quite right. It's not the actual belly fat that is causing the brain problem. It's more that what causes the belly fat to exist is also causing issues in the brain, essentially. So the belly fat is almost a side effect, and so is the reduced learning, the memory, the mood issues that we're seeing in the brain. So it's very important to understand that those two things are correlated, and actually the problems that go behind it are what we need to target. So it's not just about, we're not just trying to body shame young people, we're actually trying to look at what are the cofactors, essentially. So that could be sleep, lack of exercise, overuse of technology, loneliness, would you believe it? And of course, diet.
The headline essentially has run away with itself. It's conflating the two and making it sound like belly fat is an issue for our children's education, when in reality, it's a matter of actually we need to be encouraging healthier habits, a better diet, more sleep. As you mentioned, loneliness, for example. Is it healthy, though, for these headlines to suggest, like you said, potential for body shaming, potential for, parents getting the wrong impression? Is that what the real issue here is?
I mean, everything has a positive and a negative side. If any parent looks at this and thinks, oh my gosh, I'm seeing my child is getting a little bit podgier around the middle, I need to do something, and kicks them into action. And same with children, it's not a bad idea to inform them and educate them about diet and exercise, and it's good to know about those things.
GB News, the People's Channel.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
So he can say whatever he wants.
A straight talking show where all voices are heard.
And, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m. weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 2:20, and Donald Trump thinks that he has the solution to bringing down your energy bill: drilling more North Sea oil.
Yes, posting on his Truth social network, the US president also urged to stop using wind turbines, urging Britain to stop that, calling them costly and indeed unsightly.
Well, to discuss this further, we're joined now by energy consultant Catherine Porter. Catherine, do you think Donald Trump's got the measure of Britain's energy problems?
Well, absolutely. Wind turbines absolutely add huge amounts of cost to our bills. I published a report earlier this week that went into this in some detail. But even if we just look at the most recent subsidy round last year for offshore wind, the price was £83 per megawatt hour. And that compares with an average wholesale electricity price of just £73 a megawatt hour last year. So offshore wind on that basis is 13% more expensive than gas-based electricity. And that's before you pay the costs of backup and pay for the intermittency, pay for all the extra grid connections.
But Catherine, the government keeps on saying that offshore wind is the cheapest form of energy, that it's so cheap that it's in the air, that the answer is blowing in the breeze, so says Ed Miliband. Are they lying?
Well, I mean, I can't explain why he says this, but it's just not true. The data show that it's not true. Offshore wind priced at £83 and the wholesale gas-based power price is £73. And not only that, Ørsted cancelled the flagship project from the last auction round, claiming that the £83 wasn't enough. So a 13% premium over the gas-based power price was too low to support offshore wind. And we have a high expectation that the next auction rounds will come in even higher. The government is considering extending the contract terms from 15 years to 20 years. And that's likely because they've been told that the amounts have to be more expensive in order to justify them being built. When we remember that we started subsidising offshore wind back in 1990, this is already 35 years. If these contracts, even at 15 years, that would mean half a century of subsidies. This is just ridiculous.
But Catherine, isn't that the problem? It's the way that we have structured our energy pricing, the fact that our electricity unit price is related to the most expensive part of the process in producing the electricity, the fact that we have negotiated these contracts.
Everybody does that.
Well, I don't think every single country does that. But nevertheless, isn't the problem the way...
I'm sorry. It does. Marginal pricing is the way everybody sets their power price. It's the last unit that you need to make to meet demand. But it's not really relevant to our bills because that only sets the wholesale price. And the subsidy is linked to the wholesale price. So
the way that other countries do it, though, Catherine, is with more regional pricing. So instead of one price for the entire country, lots of countries do the sort of regional thing and therefore have lower prices overall because obviously the highest price that you take. There are a couple of European countries that do this, aren't there?
I'm sorry, that's just not true. Yes, they have regional pricing, but it doesn't lower the overall price. If countries or areas that have regional prices have lower prices than us, it's because they structure the bills differently. We impose all our tariffs or levies and a lot of carbon costs directly on the bills. We force consumers to pay the cost of backup and intermittency. We force them to pay for the fact that we're building wind farms in places where we can't actually use the electricity they generate. You look at Seagreen, was built in October 2023. In 2024, it was turned off on purpose twice as much as it generated. So it could have generated 3 times more than it did, but 2/3 of that we had to pay them not to run because we didn't have the grid connections to move that to where it's needed. Locational pricing theoretically would encourage co-location of demand and generation. But in practice, that doesn't work because the economy doesn't want to arrange itself around electricity. It wants to arrange itself around what suits it. If you look at Texas, which is a very good comparator, they have a lot of wind in the west of the state and all their demand on the Gulf Coast. Now, on the Gulf Coast, it's either not windy at all or they have hurricanes. So you can't build wind farms there. But obviously the demand wants to be on the coast for access to imported raw materials for their factories, for access to export markets. Those people don't want to move away from the coast. So this whole idea of locational pricing reducing bills is just another fantasy.
Well, isn't the answer to that then what Ed Miliband keeps talking about? Giant pylons through the countryside to transport the electricity from those windy areas like the west of Texas to the east of Texas where the people want to live. We could do the same through East Anglia.
Yes, so a better solution than locational pricing is just to build more grid infrastructure. You don't have to have pylons, though. You could do underground cabling. But really, I mean, if you're building all these wind farms, you have to subsidise them for decades. They have a capacity factor of 35%, which means they effectively only work 1/3 of the time.
Catherine, I'm so sorry. We are going to have to leave it there, but we've run out of time. But Catherine, thank you so much for coming on. Catherine Porter.
Really good to get some real numbers in this debate, which are often lacking. But this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come.
We'll be going to the New York Stock Exchange as it opens, but let's take a quick look at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange to see how the effects of Trump's new 50% tariff on EU exports is coming along.
Oh, well, stay tuned for New York.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. One more fine day before the weather changes quite a bit for the weekends. The wet weather, in fact, already moving in later today across parts of Northern Ireland, courtesy of these weather fronts finally pushing away the high pressure that's brought many of us a fine spell through this week. And it's still pretty good out there today. Some thickening cloud across southern counties may produce 1 or 2 showers, but generally dry and bright, some good spells of sunshine. But it is clouding over across western Scotland, and there's those weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland, slowly trickling in, getting towards Belfast by the middle of the afternoon. Temperature-wise, well, in the sunny spells, we could still get to 22, maybe 23 Celsius. Cooler around some coasts and where it is predominantly cloudy, and certainly feeling cooler as the rain seeps its way into Northern Ireland and trickles into western Scotland during this evening. Much of Scotland will stay fine through the evening rush hour, but that rain will be pushing on to the west coast. It's going to be a damp end to the day across Northern Ireland, and that rain spreading into parts of north and west Wales too. Further south and east, staying staying dry and fine. But even here, it is going to cloud over, and that rain will be working into pretty much all areas as we go through the night. So if you're heading out this evening, just be prepared for that rain to be creeping its way across many western areas, getting to eastern England, eastern Scotland through the early hours, maybe even the odd heavier burst here and there. So a very different night, a very damp night and a very mild night. Last night we got down to -5 in Scotland. Tonight, most of us staying in double figures. So it will be a cold start to the weekend, but it will be a dull and a damp start. Now, this main area of rain is going to shimmy away pretty smartly. So for most places, tomorrow's a brightening up kind of day. There'll be some lifting of the cloud, maybe even a few sunny spells, but that could spark some heavy showers, perhaps over eastern England, northeast Scotland, 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland. So yes, there'll be some showers, but it should brighten up as we go through Saturday.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon. This is the latest AI travel news from GBnews.com. Expect congestion on the M4 westbound from junction 38 Margam to junction 45 Wynnesforgan. The M1 northbound between junctions 24 and 25 in Derbyshire has heavy traffic. The A14 eastbound in Northamptonshire between junctions 13 Thrapston and 16 Catworth is congested. The M42 southbound in Solihull between junctions 9 and 7 also faces congestion. The A249 northbound in Kent is partially closed due to a collision. And on the trains, Transport for Wales reports no trains between Hereford and Craven Arms, while East Midlands Railway is disrupted at St Albans City. For more travel news, go to gbnews.com.
Crash Law 24 sponsors GB News Traffic and Travel Report.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just coming up to 2:30. And of course, Donald Trump has announced 50% tariffs are being considered for the European Union. That's American tariffs on EU imports. How will this affect us being squeezed in the middle? Well, let's speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, this was an astonishing announcement.
It really is. But I'm looking at the stock markets now. The FTSE 100 in London was down by 1%, but it's recovered as an initial losses. Frankfurt down much more, as you might expect, being on the continent. But I wonder whether the markets have learned the lesson which you were describing earlier, Miriam, and I think Tom also, that we've been here before with Trump. He announced his big tariffs, of course. We saw Liberation Day, didn't we? And the markets tanking after that back in February, I think it was, or certainly early this year. And then, of course, markets come back. Now we're watching there the opening of the US stock market. How it reacts there will be fascinating. As things stand, we're waiting to see how the EU might react to it. The reports right now that the EU may impose a $21 billion, £18 billion package of retaliatory tariffs on the European Union. That may well affect in a bad way Northern Ireland. I'm told by experts in the past half an hour that our exports from Northern Ireland to America are not affected, but if the EU imposes tariffs, that will drive up the cost of those products in Northern Ireland. But we're watching there now the opening of the New York Stock Exchange. We're waiting to see how that market responds to this dramatic moment. Yet again, Donald Trump driving the news agenda with some extraordinary posting on social media. He said that the EU's powerful trade barriers, VAT taxes, corporate penalties, non-monetary trade barriers, monetary manipulation, unfair and unjustified lawsuits against US companies have led to a trade deficit of $250 million, and that's why he says the US will impose 50% trade tariffs from a week on Sunday. And he's saying, come and make things in America and you won't pay these costs.
Chris, it was very interesting how he framed this, saying that the EU was set up in order to compete with America and to compete unfairly with America. Of course, that's not really the reason that the EU was set up all those years ago, partly to keep peace in Europe after a horrendous first half of the 20th century. But nevertheless, this is clearly the way that he sees the EU. Keir Starmer must be very grateful today that we are no longer in it.
Yes, although if you admit that, I don't know. I mean, the EU started as a coal and steel trading area, then it became a European economic community, and it became a political idea, didn't it, in the early 1990s? And at that point, I think many on the right of politics diverted away from where the EU was going. Yeah, but no question, will Sir Keir Starmer say, I'm glad I'm out? Certainly, I spoke to Nick Thomas-Symonds, who devised this Brexit reset deal announced by the PM on Monday. He says we are not going back into the European Union. The conversation about single market, customs union, even freedom of movement, he says those are a conversation for 8 years ago. This Labour Party is doing its own deals here on the side of the European Union, but sovereignty will not be affected. And maybe he should be pleased that we are yet again choosing a third way between the US and the European Union. And frankly, that's been a debate in politics for the past 50 years in the UK.
Now, I should just say we've started to get these numbers in from the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones Index is down by almost 500 points. Now, that's a little over 1% of its value. The S&P 500 is down 69 points. That's, again, a little over 1% of its value. Yeah. And the Nasdaq down by 1.5%. So we are seeing those numbers drop. What we can see on our screen here is Frankfurt, where it seems to have perhaps had a little bit more of an impact. And I suppose this will be the start of very testy negotiations between the EU and the United States. Perhaps a moment where they walk away, or maybe even intensify.
Oh, that's right, Tom. I think looking at the market has ticked up. It looks like both London and Frankfurt dropped by about 1% and then have come back. And it looks like we might be seeing a similar thing played out in New York. But the reports right now on the Telegraph's website showing that there could be a list of US goods, including wheat, motorcycles, Levi jeans could be taxed more coming into the European Union from the US. There's a bigger list. This list so far is £18 billion worth of retaliatory tariffs on US imports. It could go to 80 billion if it gets worse, but of course currently member states in the EU are wrangling over what level to set them at. So yet again, a difficult, stormy time looking into the bank holiday weekend here in the UK.
Now, Chris, it's very interesting how Donald Trump manages to set the global news agenda through his Truth Social media posts. So it does slightly remind me of how in this country, whenever a government minister dares to announce something outside Parliament, they get a thorough ticking off from the Speaker. Donald Trump's under no such constraints, is he? No.
Well, no, he's not. And part of the beauty of our democracy is that our Prime Minister has to answer questions from MPs in the Commons every Wednesday. He has to present to the Commons first. Our head of state is the King, and that's why he has the freedom of action over in the States, Donald Trump, that our Prime Minister won't have. We should also discuss, by the way, what he said today about drill, baby, drill, that expression. He thinks we should be drilling more for oil and gas in the North Sea. He says in terms, this is Donald Trump about the UK, we should stop with the costly and unsightly windmills and bring our energy costs down. Now, that intervention from Donald Trump is mistimed because we have got a fall in the energy price cap, thank goodness, for tens of millions of households in this country. So he's saying that would have more, I think, more impact if we see that price gap increasing, but it is coming down later this summer, and that's a relief for many. But no question, Donald Trump, he sets the agenda all the time, and we have to, frankly, jump.
Well, Christopher Hope, thanks indeed for joining us live from Westminster as we get some of that immediate market reaction to that news of tariffs. Should they say that Scott Bessent in Trump's cabinet, of course, has been saying that most countries are negotiating in good faith with the United States, except for the European Union. It does look like the Americans have the European Union especially in their crosshairs, or at least the Trump administration does. They really do have it. They do think the European Union as an entity is something that is challenging America, going up against America, taxing American companies, fining American companies, and they're responding in kind in their view.
And it is an extraordinarily over-regulated bloc, isn't it, in terms of trading regulations, standards. And that's one of the reasons why people voted for Brexit, because this idea of only being allowed, straight bananas and all these other kind of hyperbole, maybe, of extreme regulations. But nevertheless, even the tech industry in the EU is so heavily regulated, and that makes it much more difficult to trade.
Well, I mean, we've been looking at some of the new AI systems that have been released. Even in the last week or so, Google has got a new system where you can type in one sentence and have ultra-realistic video with sound that appears. I mean, really magic stuff that the Americans have access to, but in the EU and, frankly, in Britain, we don't have access to this too. Arguably, some experts think this is about GDPR regulation, which is obviously a legacy data privacy regulation from our time in the European Union. But it's not just that. They've also got an AI Act that is stopping pretty much any new frontier model development in the EU.
Of course, the other aspect is that there is a huge trading deficit between the US and the EU, whereas we're fairly balanced between the US and the UK, meaning that it's much more advantageous to the US to give us a free trade deal or something along those lines. Obviously, Trump's tariffs very much are targeted at reducing trade deficits, so the EU is a very obvious victim.
Now, just looking at that line in Frankfurt, it does seem to be there is a recovery going on as we speak. I wonder if people who are throwing their money about today are expecting that perhaps this is all a negotiating tactic. Perhaps these 50% tariffs won't actually come into effect after all, and perhaps something will be thrashed out because of this. Although I suppose that is a guess, because of course those 10% tariffs we do know are going to be there. Could they rise? Could it be 25%? Will it be 50%? We just don't know.
And unless things change, which we've got to assume they will, but unless things change, they'll be imposed very, very quickly in a matter of days, which really does put the pressure on the EU negotiators. Hopefully it'll be quicker than Brexit, because that did take a notoriously long amount of time.
Well, yes, let's absolutely hope so. But it is fascinating how Donald Trump does dominate the conversation with so many of the different topics that we're talking about today. I mean, whether it's energy, whether it's trade, frankly, even in the Chagos deal, Donald Trump played an outsized role because it's a joint US-UK base. I mean, this is touching everything in our lives.
And then look at the Vice President, J.D. Vance, his interventions on free speech, on European security. I mean, you just have to look back 6 months ago to the end of the Biden administration and got to be honest, Biden was making the news for speculation about whether or not he had the mental ability to continue being president. And Kamala Harris made almost no impact globally as the vice president. What a change.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a particularly energetic, I suppose, administration. And that can, lots of people would say, look, they're doing exactly what they said they'd do, and they're doing it fast, and they're doing it big. Other people would say, oh, no, they're doing exactly what they said they'd do, and they're doing it fast, and they're doing it big. Well, let's analyse this further with Catherine McBride, OBE, the economist, the fellow for the Centre for Brexit Policy. Catherine, we've got you on screen here looking at the Dow Jones as well, this index over there on the New York Stock Exchange, which is down a little under 1% so far. Catherine, what do you make of this big announcement from the President?
Well, I'm obviously mostly interested in what he said about the EU. The Dow is obviously going down because of what he said about Apple. He's going to put 25% tariffs onto Apple. That's sort of swings and roundabouts. Though Apple obviously sells a lot in the US, it sells a lot of goods internationally, and no other country, as far as I'm aware, is going to put similar tariffs on Apple. So I wouldn't be rushing to sell my Apple shares, but and in a lot of respects, people will possibly, you know, the amount that people spend on Apple phones is already much higher than comparative phones in the market. So that the people who buy Apple phones are less, shall we say, driven by price. They're more interested in the brand or the features or whatever. So I'm not sure it's going to affect them quite as much as the market seems to think, because, you know, the people are not buying Apple phones because they're cheap, at least not in Britain.
Indeed.
But his threats on the EU are much more of a worry to the UK. We should be terrified about that, because it's only a matter of time before he notices what Starmer, etc., did earlier this week by granting the EU the ability to make all of our rules on SPS issues.
Now, this is sanitary and phytosanitary, basically food and agriculture and plants and animals and that sort of thing.
Well, it's much more than that. If you read the fine print in the Europeans publication, not the one that the UK government published, which is a sort of PR exercise, but the EU also claimed that they will be controlling our food standards, they'll be controlling our welfare, animal welfare, they'll be controlling our farming practices, they'll be controlling everything, basically, everything to do with farming. And we're allowed to have a couple of exemptions as long as those exemptions don't compete with EU products, which is extraordinary. So they're giving us nothing. It is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I can't work out why anyone would do that. It is, well, I think Boris Johnson described it incredibly well. And if you haven't read his description of it, I won't refer to it here. But
no, I think he actually said it on GB News in an interview with Mark White on Monday. A pretty spicy metaphor for the position that Keir Starmer's found himself in. But of course, what the government says is it's going to be easier to sell sausages or British burgers across to Europe, and we get other things like pet passports. If you want to take your pet on holiday, it becomes easier. That's what they argue the SPS deal has achieved.
Well, that's not true, actually. We've never stopped selling sausages. I can show you all the trade figures. They just had to be frozen in the same way that a lot of the meat we buy from Ireland, which is our main supplier of beef from the EU, a lot of that is coming frozen as well. You know, freezing meat is not an issue, doesn't deteriorate the product. They are spreading these rumours that are not true. They've also claimed we can't sell shellfish to Europe. That's also not true. I've got trade figures for that as well. The only reason the trade dropped is a lot of the shellfish we were selling to the EU was being processed outside of the UK. So if it's shelled or cooked in Vietnam, if you go into Waitrose and buy some prawns there, you'll see that you just read the label.
Catherine, I'm so sorry, we are going to have to leave it there, but Catherine McBride, Catherine McBride, thank you so much for joining us, and sorry to have to cut you off.
Absolutely.
Okay, then.
Well, we do have to declare some breaking news now. A major incident has been declared as emergency services battle a blaze in Rushden, Northamptonshire, at a recycling warehouse.
Yes, firefighters have been tackling the blaze since 6:30 a.m. this morning, and Northamptonshire Fire and Rescue have said that the fire has involved a large quantity of plastic at the premises. We'll be bringing you more on that as soon as we have it here at GB News.
So as we stay across that story, do stay across with us here on GB News. We'll be right back with you after the travel weather.
Ready to soak up that holiday sunshine?
Won't we need some cover?
No worries. All sorted.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
There's the chance of a little bit of light rain in Sicily over the course of the weekend. Small chance of some showers in Mallorca as well. Plenty of sunshine for Greece. That should continue for the next few days. We've seen some wet weather across Croatia recently, but the showers here are also clearing. There's that thicker cloud and patchy rain that may affect Sicily. 1 or 2 showers for Mallorca and Menorca. Small chance of a shower or 2 in southern Spain as well. But generally, Spain and Portugal and the Canaries set fair with plenty of sunshine for the next few days.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Westminster's full of talk, but out here, it's the real world.
Am I allowed to talk now?
No, that's it. This is where it matters, real people and real lives. That's what politics is all about.
The fact is Trump made a good start, no.
Straight answers, no spin, and just a couple of pints.
How many fingers have I got up?
About 10. So join me for Lee Anderson's Real World every Friday at 7 p.m. only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From the school run to the home run, watch a new show for all of Britain.
He can say whatever he wants.
A straight-talking show where all voices are heard.
And, you know, when are we going to stop talking about smashing the gangs and actually do it?
With the stories that matter from every part of our country.
There's a bit of a crash landing there for your Chancellor.
Bold, fearless and standing up for you. That's me, Martin Daubney, 3 p.m. till 6 p.m, weekdays, here only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nigel is back.
Good evening.
Unfiltered.
Are these proposals bold enough?
Uncompromising.
Will it bring growth?
Unmissable.
We as a country are brilliant.
Nigel Farage returns. Coming soon. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 11 minutes to 3 and Tottenham fans will be filling the streets of North London as their victorious players take to the streets on an open-top bus parade to celebrate their Europa League title.
So on the route, we've sent out our intrepid national reporter, Charlie Peters, to brave the streets of Tottenham. Charlie, what's the mood like where you are?
Well, Tom, Miriam, welcome to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium off White Hart Lane, the world-famous home of the Spurs and the 2025 Europa League winners, because already there is a significant gathering of people waiting for this parade. They haven't had a parade here since 1991, when Tottenham Hotspur won a then record-breaking 8 FA Cups. But the mood here is already very significant. People ready to celebrate Tottenham's 4th European trophy amid a torrid season. We're here in N17. Tottenham are finishing the league in 17th as it stands. But these fans won't care because they've won the Europa League. And I'm very happy to say that I'm joined now by GB News sports presenter Paul Coit.
Hello, Charlie.
How are you doing?
Fancy seeing you here.
How are you feeling, Paul? This is an extraordinary occasion for the club.
You know what, for the club, it's so exciting. It's been 17 years since we've had a trophy, as you well know. Actually, were you born when we had that?
Just about, Paul. Thank you very much. I was present for that experience.
I know you were. I know you were. But we're going to have such an occasion. I mean, if you just have a look. Look behind me. Look, we're expecting tens of thousands. It could go on more than that. Right the way down the Tottenham High. There's going to be a bus parade, which is going to start around 5 o'clock this afternoon. All the players, the staff, Ange on the top, they're going to come along here, move around the back of the stadium, and then join me up there. If you have a look up there, you see the stage. That's where I'm going to be, there with all the players, and then we're going to interview them. We're going to have a lovely time. We'll have a big trophy lift, and there's going to be tears. I just hope I'm not going to cry again.
Yeah, it's been a very emotional week for Spurs fans.
It really has been.
Did you anticipate this victory? Did you have a good feeling going into the match on Wednesday night?
I'm one of these that I hope, but I'm never guaranteed. I mean, nothing's guaranteed in sport, is it? So I was never really sure. But there was a strange calm amongst Spurs fans. There was great excitement. I mean, we had the fan zone in Bilbao. There were 20,000 people there in Bilbao. Many of them didn't have tickets, but that was an incredible experience. So that was great. But I think I mentioned on breakfast the other day with Eamon and Ellie, I mean, and Stephen, I just went into floods of tears. I didn't expect it was going to happen, and I'm blubbing, and then I'm looking around, and the amount of people that I spoke to had the same thing. And it just shows that sport and the love of a team does that to you, as you well know. So for those that don't get what sport's all about and how important it is in people's lives, I mean, just look now. Yeah. Just look here.
I mean, these are incredible crowds. These are incredible crowds now, Paul. Even right down the street to our left, we've got thousands, tens of thousands.
Oh dear.
Well, I think Charlie was about to say tens of thousands of people, but I suppose we'll have to catch up with him in a little bit of time. But it does look like that will be an absolutely splendid parade for all of those who care.
Very exciting. I didn't realise quite how long it had been since Tottenham had won a trophy. I mean, I must admit, I didn't know anything about the Europa League before we started covering this story, but it is the kind of second tier for the teams that didn't quite make it into the top championship.
The undercard
consolation
trophy,
prize.
the consolation prize. But they're all very happy about it, and that's nice to see.
Although my youngest we allowed him to stay up late to watch it because he's a Man U fan.
Oh, yes.
I'm not sure it's the greatest game, but it doesn't really matter if you're a Tottenham supporter, does it?
I'm sure they're making all of their excuses.
Well, we're such great experts, Tom.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But perhaps it's time to speak to the real football expert here. Of course, Martin Daubney is up next and has got a cracking show for you, so we'll hand over the baton now. Martin.
Yeah, the only football game that matters is Sunday, Nottingham Forest versus Chelsea. Forest win that, we're in Europe. I digress. On today's show, huge tariffs on the European Union. I'll tell you why. This could be a Brexit bonus. We've been spared the noose, as it were, and this is an opportunity for Britain. Plus, a reform society in Lancaster University trying to ban it, thanks to snowflake students, the tolerant left, once again, the precise things they accuse you of. And also on today's show, I'll be joined by two of the parents of the murdered by Valo Calacane, emotionally plan to revisit the site of the tragedy 2 years on. They'll be joining me to tell me why they've been forgotten and overlooked. Plus, after that flotilla was interrupted in the week in the Channel from Dunkirk, I'll be joined on the show today by the grandson of a British Army veteran evacuated on that day 85 years ago for his words. And I tell you, he is not remotely happy about it. That's all coming on the show 3 till 6. But first, it's time for your weather forecast.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. One more fine day before the weather changes quite a bit for the weekend. The wet weather, in fact, already moving in later today across parts of Northern Ireland, courtesy of these weather fronts finally pushing away the high pressure that's brought many of us a fine spell through this week. And it's still pretty good out there today. Some thickening cloud across southern counties may produce 1 or 2 showers, but generally dry and bright, some good spells of sunshine. But it is clouding over across western Scotland, and there's those weather fronts bringing rain to Northern Ireland, slowly trickling in, getting towards Belfast by the middle of the afternoon. Temperature-wise, well, in the sunny spells, we could still get to 22, maybe 23 Celsius. Cooler around some coast